What is going on, everybody? Welcome into a very special NFL Week 12 show here. So I was out of town earlier this week, so I wasn't able to get to my regularly scheduled power rankings show or my weekly recap episode of the podcast. And today's show is going to be a hybrid of that. We are going to be going, doing the countdown, doing the power rankings here today, but it's going to be from a little bit of a different angle, kind of a how it started versus how it's going discussion. What went right? What went wrong? Kind of where I was right, where I was wrong on these teams based on coming into the year and where they're at right now. And then for each team, I'm also going to end the discussion by saying what makes for a successful finish to the season. So obviously a lot to talk about here today. I've got a lot of notes prepped. I'm really looking forward to today's show. I want to get right into it. First off, though, if you enjoy these long form videos or podcasts from me, I do want to remind you, I do a show every single week of the Fully Inflated Football Podcast. This is going to be one of those episodes, but I am posting this one on the main channel this week. But if you want to go check that out on YouTube, that link is in the description below, or search Fully Inflated wherever you get your audio podcasts. If you're already joining us from the audio podcast feed, welcome back. But beyond that, if you could please hit that like button here on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe. It's a free and easy thing that really does help. I really appreciate it. But without further ado, let's get started. Obviously, starting at the bottom of the power rankings this week, the Jacksonville Jaguars. And this cements what has been a historic, catastrophic collapse. Now ranked 32nd in the league. They take possession of the number one pick if the season ended today. The collapse. Like, there's no other way to put this. They were 8-3. I was discussing them as a Super Bowl contender. They were coming off some big wins. They were good the year before that, the first year with Doug Peterson. And then Trevor gets banged up, plays through the injury, and the team completely loses control of all competency. They lost, I can't remember the exact number, but I think they lost like 6 of the last 7 games or something like that. And heading into this season, I ranked them 17th, kind of smack dab in the middle of the league, saying, all right, you got a promising young quarterback. You were good last year, and then you weren't. Can they get back to what they did in the first half of last year with a healthy Trevor Lawrence? And they obviously just haven't been able to capture any of that magic. It's been the opposite. They have continued to spiral as a team, as an organization, on both sides of the ball, frankly. So there's no way to sugarcoat it. This is ugly. They fall, obviously, to the last spot in the power rankings. But if you want to ask, what the hell happened? How did we get here? There are multiple answers to that question, but I do think you have to start with Doug Peterson, and that's not a hot take. That's where all the fingers are getting pointed. I'm just like the rest of you. I can't believe that Doug Peterson is still in that building coaching that football team. And I feel more confident blaming Doug Peterson because this is exactly what happened at the end of his time in Philadelphia and exactly why I didn't like this hire from the Jags from the get-go. I spent a lot of time apologizing for not liking the Doug Peterson hire for the Jags after the first season. Boy, has that come full circle, because this is exactly what happened in Philadelphia, where the team has talent. And I think we can all agree the Jags have at least serious pockets of talent on this football team, but they lose a bunch of close games. They lose in the stupidest ways you can imagine, like snapping the ball into a guy in motion. The amount of just ugly, negative plays that put this team behind the 8 ball. You have a team that just doesn't have an identity, a poor culture from the outside looking in, and a young, ascending quarterback that is going in the wrong direction. And that's exactly what happened with Carson Wentz. I mean, he was an MVP candidate, really someone that was looking like a future face of the league. And due to Doug Peterson's offense, he lost all confidence and spiraled out of control, which is exactly what we're seeing in Jacksonville. So to me, Doug Peterson is not a good head coach. He is maybe a bit of a front runner when things are going well. He can keep things going, but the second things start to go in the wrong direction, he can't find answers. He can't rally his team. This is obviously just a completely flat, dead football team. They lost to the Lions 52-6 this week. And it's gotten so bad that even if Trevor does go back out there, I don't know if that's enough for me to say this isn't the worst team in football. I probably wouldn't put them 32nd because I do still think Trevor is a cut above a lot of the quarterbacks in the bottom tier of the rankings that we'll see. But yes, you start with Doug Peterson, and then with mentioning Trevor Lawrence there, he is a part of the issue, a part of the reason things have gone so south for the Jags. Late last season, he played through injury and really struggled. Really struggled. Straight up sucked as he tried to play through that injury. I don't think he should have played. But the hope was, of course, he could get healthy, shake that off, and go back to playing good football, which he had done for a good 20-plus games at that point in Jacksonville. And just hasn't been able to get it back. He started incredibly slow. I think that's the main thing I'm going to pile on Trevor here for, is he really contributed to this team starting so slow and starting to get into that spiral. I do think Trevor has very quietly started to play much, much better, to the point that if you're really genuinely watching the Jags, you're not necessarily worried about Trevor. You're not maybe stoked when you maybe drafted Trevor. You're like, this guy's going to be an elite top 5 guy. I think the lack of consistency and development is a red flag on Trevor, but he's not what you see on Twitter. He's not a bad quarterback. He's not someone that you trade away or get rid of. But his legitimate struggles in the first month of the season were a big reason this thing got out of control. And then now that he's started to play a little better, the rest of the team isn't stepping up. This team has a horrible defense. That was a major concern on this team coming into the year, that Trent Baalke didn't do enough with this unit. The defensive line has been mediocre. Josh Hines Allen has been fantastic. Beyond that, you've gotten a couple good games out of Trayvon Walker, but he's mostly been quiet. Year 3 has not been a boom for him. It's been okay. And the Eric Armstead acquisition was essentially signing a name to a bunch of money that has not contributed to this team. So the D-line's not working. The secondary that we knew was going to be a mess coming into the year has been exactly that. Signing Darnell Savage to be a starter for you is clearly a mistake. And yeah, this team just stinks, man. I don't think we need to drone on about all the different, pockets of this team that need to get better. That much is very clear. But as we wrap up the Jags by talking about what matters going forward, it's all about the coaching search at this point. What are your top candidates? Can you sell the idea that this team has talent and that Trevor Lawrence is still the franchise quarterback? Can you sell that idea to maybe not a Ben Johnson? I don't think Ben Johnson would take this job, but can you sell it to a Joe Brady or whoever those top candidates are going to be come season's end? There will be another show on the podcast, probably in 2 or 3 weeks, really diving into the coaching carousel. But obviously there are some big names out there. Can you sell one of them that this is a good job to take? The other thing that matters going forward for the Jags, I did want to discuss Trayvon Walker for a second. Not to bash on him. I've obviously been pretty damn low on Trayvon Walker, as most people have. Was a clear reach with the number 1 pick. But obviously a big year 3 for him, this freaky athlete that hardly even played edge in college. What sort of growth were you going to see from him over the years, a young player? Can he tap into those traits and really get to the point where he's a franchise edge rusher? And I still don't think the answer to that question is a resounding yes. You've seen incremental growth every year, from bad pass rusher to adequate to like above average this year. He's been solid. Not what you expect from a number 1 overall pick, though, in a guy that you're going to have to make a decision about his 5th-year option next year, and then eventually a guy that could demand a ton of money because he has walked into a lot of sacks last year especially. And, as we know, when you've got that sack stat and you're the number 1 overall pick and you're trending in the right direction, this is a guy that could potentially demand $27, $28 million. That's just the reality of the situation. And he's a guy I'm watching the rest of the year. I think last week against Detroit, actually, he had some good moments. And then he had that big game against the Colts where he was showing great hand placement, good power rush, and the real things you wanted to see, like a legitimate elite performance in one game this year, being that Colts game. Can you get another one or two of those this year and really get excited about him and Josh Hines-Allen with Trevor on the other side of the ball? It doesn't have to be all doom and gloom for the Jags, but I do think Trayvon Walker finishing strong is a big thing to keep an eye on. If you're a Jags fan looking for something to watch on this team, that's going to be the thing. And yeah, if he blows up, again, coaching candidate might be attracted, and it's also an attractive job because the general manager, hopefully this team is smart enough to fire Trent Baalke, who I think has been the worst GM in the league for 3 years. All the roster issues that have led to the Jags being so bad come right back to a lot of Trent Baalke's questionable decisions. But hopefully, you're coming in as a new coach with a new GM and a clean slate with some building blocks. I mean, you could do worse. There's worse places to live than Jacksonville, Florida as well. So I don't think it's got to be complete, utter doom and gloom for the Jags. I think this can turn around, but it is all going to come down to the coaching search and finding the right people to run this team, because from a culture direction point of view, it just is not where it's got to be. And that's not a hot take, but let's go to my number 31 ranked team, the Las Vegas Raiders. A lot less to say about this Raiders team. I had them ranked 24th coming into the year. They're now ranked 31st. They're in contention for the number 1 overall pick. They lose 34-19 this week against the Dolphins. And I don't think this is terribly surprising. I mean, even though I ranked the Raiders 24th, I definitely considered them as a team that might be picking number 1 in the next season. I ranked them at 24, though, because I thought they had a decent floor. And unfortunately, that floor has been completely cut out from under them due to injuries. If you're already a bad football team with one of the ugliest, if not the ugliest looking quarterback situations in the league, and all your best players get hurt, yeah, you're going to end up being one of the worst teams in the league. And it really is that simple for the Raiders. Coming into the year, really both sides of the ball, especially defensively, you felt like this defense they were a top 10 defense last year. And that's centered around Max Crosby being an elite number 1, defensive player of the year type of candidate. He's been banged up. He's been playing, but he clearly has not been the same old Max Crosby. I'm not sitting here going to say he's not the same guy or he regressed. I think he's just playing hurt. It's very clear when you watch the Raiders games, if any of you actually are. If you're not, I can't blame you. But the identity of this defense was supposed to be, all right, you got Crosby. They go out and make the biggest free agent signing outside of Kirk Cousins and Christian Wilkins. He's hardly played for them. He's been out. So it's okay, your 2 best players on defense are hurt. And then offensively, the idea was you're going to run a lot of 12 personnel with Mayer and Bowers and Devontae Adams being the kind of focal point of the offense. Well, you start losing some games. Devontae wants out 4 games into this thing. And then Mayer, I don't think Mayer is some superstar or anything, but he's played in 4 games. And I don't think he's been healthy when he has played. So, they haven't been able to do what they wanted to do coming into the year. They fired their offensive coordinator. Jacoby Myers has missed some time. It's just been this team had to have good injury luck if they were going to be a frisky team. And even earlier in the year, right, they go into Baltimore, win that game. Maybe they showed some flashes early. But in terms of how we got here, it really does just come down to that. Now, as far as what actually matters for this Raiders team, it's very, very simple. It's get the right coach, evaluate these quarterbacks, determine if any of them can come into an ugly situation and work with it. And you have to make a decision on if you're taking a quarterback this year or if you're really going to be patient here and make this a 2 or a 3 year rebuild. It really just comes down to that. And the other question is, does this team have any sex appeal to a top coaching candidate? I don't know if they necessarily do. the roster's obviously in a garbage spot. It is a historic organization. Theoretically, someone would enjoy the idea of being the head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders. I think they do still have the branding, if you will, to appeal in that way. But is this a situation where you got kind of a loud owner? You've got Tom Brady as another voice that you got to kind of appease in this situation. You've got a GM, you've got your own coaches and yourself. So it's just a very, very muddy situation. They've got a long, long way to go, but they got to just start, laying the foundations, putting brick by brick down, and start getting to work. It's that simple for the Raiders. They're in a really tough spot. One of the worst spots of any team in the league right now. Okay, number 30, the Dallas Cowboys, who started number 11th in my power rankings. They now find themselves number 30. They lose 34-10 against Houston in what is now a lost season. The all-in season has become a lost season. And I'm probably not even watching Cowboys games at this point. If you're a Cowboys fan, it's just really depressing to see this team try and play football with Cooper Rush. I do hope they put Trey Lance out there at some point because at least that's entertaining. Let the guy show what he can do. Clearly he's just not a good football player, though, because San Fran gave up on him, and he can't even beat out Cooper Rush at this point. It's not looking good for Trey Lance. But in terms of what happened, how do you go from number 11 all the way down to 30, where you're one of the worst teams in football? I'm wondering if this team's going to win another game. I mean, it's a combination of all of the worst case scenario outlooks for what we thought might have been possible for this Cowboys team. Ranking them 11th is like, yeah, they're a playoff caliber team, but not necessarily safe, right? And I think we all watched them lose to the Packers in the playoffs last year, their lack of run defense, and saw their offseason where they lost a lot of starters, didn't do a lot to replenish it, and said, all right, well, if things don't go right culture-wise, this thing's going to go off the deep end. And that's exactly what happened. This was not a very good football team, even with Dak Prescott. But obviously without him now, it's a train wreck. But, the poor offseason that this team had that was well documented, combined with a bad coach that should have been fired last year. I could not believe Mike McCarthy was not fired after that Packers game. It just left everything flat, left everything stale. Plus, a ton of injuries is how you end up at 30. I mean, this team has been injured to shit. On defense, their basically entire edge group, which is the identity of this football team, is the edge group. It started with Sam Williams in the offseason. DeMarcus Lawrence goes down. Their second-round pick, Marshawn Kneeland. They lost Dorrance Armstrong in the offseason. They felt like they had the depth to replace that. No, they didn't. Not when everybody got hurt. And then Micah Parsons goes down, and it's like, all right, well, everything they thought they were going to get out of this pass rush, because their interior is not good. I mean, Osa's fine. But, there goes their entire defense, basically. Not to mention you've got Deron Bland gets hurt. Has he played a game yet this year? I'm not sure he has. So it's just been a disaster injury-wise for the defense. And then offensively, they've been dealing with injuries too. I think the Brandon Cooks injury is something that was kind of a spot that they couldn't afford one injury. Obviously, you'd rather it be Cooks than CeeDee Lamb, but you looked at that wide receiver core coming into the year. It's like, all right, you got CeeDee. Cooks is like a decent number 2, did some good stuff at the end of last year, and then it was nobody else. So you lose Cooks, and there's just nobody else really in that wide receiver room to throw to other than CeeDee Lamb. So teams can just focus on CeeDee. That was a really poorly timed injury to show up before they found anybody else at wide receiver. And the offensive line has just been bad. I think Zach Martin has had to play through injuries this year. He's up there in age. He hasn't been his old self. You got, 2 rookies starting that have had certainly their struggles, especially Tyler Guyton. Terrence Steele has not bounced back. So that's kind of how we got here. Now, in terms of what matters the rest of the year, this season's cooked. I think there's a couple things I'm looking for the Cowboys beyond kind of getting into the coach conversations, which again, we'll have in another show. That's obviously going to be a very important decision for the Cowboys to try to get things straightened. But in terms of watching Cowboys games the rest of the year, to me, I'm looking at those two main young pieces on the O-line, Tyler Guyton at left tackle and Cooper Beebe at center. Can they finish strong? Can you feel good about those, not just interested, right? Like you're interested in those two guys being franchise options for you, but can you actually feel good about that heading into next year? Because right now, especially in Tyler Guyton's case, I don't feel good. He's got a lot of talent, though, was always going to have a rocky rookie season. And I think the last couple of weeks, he's played much better. So this team has a ton of work to do this offseason. Like, they need running back, they need wide receivers, they need multiple different pieces on the defense. They could use another interior D lineman. They could use probably another linebacker. They could use defensive backs. Like, they have so much work to do on this team. And they need other offensive linemen too, right? Like Zach Martin. I don't know how long that's going to last. If you can just not have to necessarily invest in center and left tackle because they finish strong, I would certainly feel at least slightly better about this team. And then the other interesting thing worth talking about is, can they land Travis Hunter? The top prospect in this draft probably at this point, but I think Dallas very well could not win another game the rest of the year. Very well could be looking like they're going to be that bad. And if that happens, can they legitimately get this guy? Because I mean, he's a unique player. I think the connection to Deion Sanders, being the Cowboys, we've already seen Shador has committed to playing in the Shrine Bowl instead of the Senior Bowl, which is a Dallas thing. There's a connection there, and I'm not even saying Deion is going to go coach the Cowboys. It would be really fun if that happened. Not necessarily that'd be a good thing, but I do think Travis Hunter would be really fascinating because he would be a wide receiver 2 that would be like perfect complement to CeeDee Lamb, and is kind of perfect for the defense because they already have a number 1 and number 2 corner. But could he be a guy that comes in as like a pass downs corner and be a playmaker in a secondary that is full of ball hawks? I think from a scheme fit and just team fit, like Travis Hunter on the Cowboys just feels right. I mean, Deion played there. He's been, played 2 positions in the pros, right? He played some wide receiver. So that's something that I'm very fascinated to see as we start to kind of pivot a little bit more towards some draft conversations over the next few weeks. But there's your Cowboys again, ranking 30th. But then the Cleveland Browns at number 29 in the power rankings. And this is the first team here where, I got to hold my hand up and just say I was so freaking wrong about the Browns. And, I believed in the roster talent, and that worked out for me last year. I went against the grain. I said the Browns were going to be pretty good with or without Deshaun Watson, frankly. And they were pretty good with or without Deshaun Watson. They had like the best defense in the league. Just so much talent on that team. Unfortunately, this year I bought back in, and it made me look like a fool. They're obviously towards the bottom of the league. They're in contention for the number 1 pick yet again in Cleveland. And the answer to how that happens, how they go from my number 9th ranked team to 29th, is obvious. It's Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson, the concept was he just has to be like the 25th best quarterback in the league, and this team will probably be okay. And he really was so truly terrible. He played like the 50th best quarterback in the league. So not only did his own play create a drain on this entire building in the sense that the offense couldn't move the ball, the defense was constantly on the field. It completely derailed everything they had built and started to do well defensively last year. But the drain off the field too, right? You have this fucking loser tearing down your organization who I don't even think really wanted to be there. So that obviously is how you get here. But on top of that, there are other issues here in Cleveland. This hasn't been as simple as, all right, the bad man's gone, and now we're a good football team again, right? Like, the offensive line has clearly emerged as a legitimate issue for this team this year. And that hurt Deshaun Watson's play as well. Deshaun Watson mostly was the problem, but there were some plays that even when it wasn't Watson's fault, the O-line was getting beat too quickly. And yeah, like those 2 superstar guards that we spent so much time talking about over the years in Bitonio and Teller, they've been a very average duo, and Batonio's getting up there in age. And, the tackle situation, it's been, I think, a different duo like every single week. Jack Conklin's been okay since he's come back healthy, but can you trust him in terms of durability? And unfortunately, DeJuan Jones in year 2 is not looking like an answer as a franchise tackle. I like DeJuan Jones. I'd like him to be, but the offensive line has emerged at the top of their list of needs for the off season. And then the defense has just completely fallen apart. I do think early in the year, it was a lot of just lack of inspiration. The fact that they didn't feel like they really had a chance in these games because the offense just could not move the ball. And they're just on the field so much, right? You're getting gassed. But they clearly have issues defensively beyond they're on the field too much. They're 24th in defensive DVOA after being second or third last year. And you got to really start to ask some tough questions there about Jeff Schwartz. I think that there's just been so many busts from this Browns defense. They allow, and we saw some of that last year too, even when they were playing well. Just guys taking bad angles, the over-aggressive nature of this defense. Teams have it figured out right now. And they're not really manufacturing the same pass rushes that they were able to last year either. I thought Schwartz was really creative with his blitzes, and you're not really seeing that this year. So, I mean, they've got to do some soul searching on that side of the ball too. I think they have the talent to turn things around. I still believe in Jeff Schwartz, but I don't know. I don't know, man. They're just not good defensively. They got to fix that. So, what matters the rest of the year? I hate to be overly negative, but frankly, nothing. Nothing matters the rest of this season. There's nothing that they could really do beyond just turning it around and looking like a good football team overnight and feeling a little bit better about this team, which obviously would apply to any of these bottom teams. But I just don't think that's going to happen. Things are clearly broken here. And, I mean, there's just this cloud hanging over all of this, which is the ownership. As you start to think about the offseason a little bit, what needs to happen here is they need to just stop digging a hole, cut their losses with Deshaun Watson, get him out of the building, get him out of the league because no one's picking that dude up. And I think they have to have some really hard conversations about Kevin Stefanski. I'm sorry, but I didn't really buy it coming into the year. I thought it was the worst award given out in a long time. Like, him winning Coach of the Year last year was so stupid. He gets Coach of the Year because he hired Jeff Schwartz when there's other great candidates. That offense has felt broken for 3 years. Stefanski has done nothing to fix that offense. And he's losing the locker room. So can you look past, like, that Coach of the Year award in 2023 might have been the worst thing that could have happened to the Browns if they end up sticking with Stefanski. I just don't think he's a very good head coach. And Browns fans got mad at me when I said that in the Browns deep dive. It's been a part of the issue here. They have not been able to really build much momentum offensively. They've had a couple games where you're like, oh, they did some good stuff, but they've never really backed it up with a good performance. And it's super frustrating. So that's what needs to be done. And then you have to go out and find the right candidate that can repair this thing, which is a whole nother difficult thing to do. But do you have any confidence in this ownership group to do that? Frankly, no. So it is a dark, gloomy conversation for Cleveland. And it just kind of sucks if you're a Browns fan that you know that ownership is who's going to have to fix this. And that's not an ownership group that's going to do that. This feels like the ownership group that turns around and rolls the dice on Deion Sanders and Shedeur Sanders, and maybe that works. Maybe you get lucky, and it'd be fun, but could also see that going entirely south. All right, let's move on to the New York Giants. The New York Giants started number 28 heading into the year, and right now they rank number 28. So, we didn't have a lot of expectations for this Giants team anyway. So it's not necessarily what went right, what went wrong. Obviously 2-8 is frustrating. There's a lot of teams that just haven't won games this year. I do think the Giants are a better football team than 2-8. They have 6 one-score losses or 5 one-score losses. They've lost to Washington, 2 games by a combined 8 points against Washington. They lost to the Steelers by a touchdown. They lost that Panthers game in overtime. They lost the Cowboys by 5 points when they were good. And then they did lose that Bengals game on Sunday Night Football. It was a pretty tight game. So the Giants, I'm less doom and gloom about, frankly, because I am just a Daboll truther. And I know when you start losing games at this volume, it becomes harder and harder to believe in the guy. And I don't think the same of Daboll as I did coming off of the Coach of the Year season a couple years ago, but I still really like him. And yes, they're losing games, but they really have. I mean, this has been one of the worst rosters in the league for a while now. It was when Daboll led them to a playoff season in a remarkable coaching effort. But they're actually finding a baseline of talent that you can start to build around. I mean, Malik Neighbors obviously has been a hit, but Tyrone Tracy looks like a star running back to me. You got Drew Phillips, Tyler Nubin have been big hits on day 2 of the draft in a secondary that desperately needed some dudes. Micah McFadden has really stepped up in year 3. As a linebacker for them. You got Theo Johnson at tight end, looking pretty solid, that they take a gamble on the athlete and they're working through some things, but he might be a starter for them. Evan Neal got his first start in a long time last game. They're coming off the bye week here, so maybe they can get something from him. That's a different conversation. He's only played 1 game, but, look better. And even like an Elijah Chapman, a quiet, undrafted pickup for them that's a nice, 5th or 6th pass rusher to have, kind of a tweener gap shooter type. So for the Giants, I mean, their season's obviously cooked, right? But you've got these young players kind of for the first time, really, in Brian Daboll's time here, you've got a nice foundation of interesting guys to kind of start crafting things around. It's not leading to wins this year, but again, they've been more competitive than their record indicates. And the conversation for the Giants obviously shifts to, do you keep Brian Daboll? That's the big discussion. Ownership, to the Giants ownership's credit, they've said, we're going to keep Brian Daboll. And I really hope they stand by that. I really do. And I get it. Anytime you start losing games, the offense looks ugly. That play caller, the offensive coordinator, and even if it's the head coach in Brian Daboll's case, he is going to be scapegoat number 1 every single time with a bullet. It is automatic. I've been doing this for 7 years. Things go south. The first finger pointed 99% of the time, offensive play caller. Because everybody's played Madden. I could do a better job, right? Okay, well, you got a bad O-line. You've got Daniel Jones at quarterback. Things get a little bit harder in the NFL. So I get it. The Giants offense has not been able to replicate what they had in that first year with Brian Daboll. And you're wondering where that's at. Why can't they do that again? That's what Daboll's here to do. I do understand that. But for me, who the hell are you getting that's an upgrade from Brian Daboll? I don't know who that answer is right now, because I don't think Ben Johnson's taking this job. Not when you don't have a quarterback in a quarterback draft that's seemingly kind of mid at the top. We'll have more room for that conversation in the future, but I don't think it's bold to say that Ben Johnson doesn't want this job. Beyond that, is there anybody I would rather have than Brian Daboll? I don't think so. I mean, he came in as a premium, a Ben Johnson caliber candidate. And the only reason you were able to get him is because he's from Jersey, right? He's from the area. He wanted to go to New York. So you were lucky enough to get him. He comes in, has one of the best coaching efforts we've seen in the last few years. He took a team just like this to the playoffs and won a playoff game. And unfortunately, because he was so good in his first year, they tricked themselves into thinking they were better than they were. They bring back Daniel Jones, and that has set this whole thing back because Daniel Jones is a backup quarterback. He just is. And he can keep you in these games. He can run the offense, do some stuff. But anytime there's a big play with Daniel Jones, if it's a big 3rd and 8, he's throwing that crossing route 4 yards short of the sticks. 4 yards short of the sticks. He's not extending plays. That's just not who he is. He's not making those big plays to win these games. He's a backup quarterback in that sense. So for me, because Dable was so good early, it's set this team back a little bit in terms of finding their quarterback. But Dable has never gotten to pick his quarterback. So what malpractice would that be if you land if you ranked up at their time of hire, who are like the top candidates when they were hired? I mean, Ben Johnson's going to be super high if he even leaves Detroit this year. But I would say Daboll is in the top 5 of the last 10 years. If you hire that guy and don't at least let him pick a quarterback, like, that's malpractice. And I think they know that. So for me, he gets another year. Hopefully, they can finish strong, keep losing. And he can get his pick of the litter. Whether, he might not need the number 1 pick to get his pick of the litter out of these QBs, whether that's the 2nd or 3rd pick, though. Let him get the first swing at a quarterback from this draft. I think the general agreement on this class is like there's a bunch of names. You got Ewers, you got Shedeur, you got Ward, you got Milton. But who's going to be good out of that group? Let Brian Daboll get a crack at finding who's going to be good out of that group. Yeah, that's just where I'm kind of at with the Giants is stay strong, stick to the plan, don't let go of Daboll. And if you do, you better be right. You better find a good candidate. Okay, at number 27, I have the Tennessee Titans, which they started at number 27. So just like the Giants, a 2-8 team that probably a little bit better than their record says. They've been in a lot of games, but have not been able to finish. They also have been without Will Levis for about half this season, which has rendered about half of their games borderline unwatchable this season. But yeah, they're coming off a 10-win loss to a good Vikings team. I feel like that's been kind of par for the course for them this year. I do think, this team is obviously in evaluation mode, new coach, like they got a bunch of new players in here, both rookies and a huge wave of free agent signings. So they're trying to figure out like, who can we work with? Who's here to help us now? Who's here to help us for the future? So, talking about expectations and where this team is going and upside, that really has never been, at least in the realm of my conversations on the Titans. And I think some Titans fans were sick of that for a while, but have kind of started to realize like, okay, yeah, this team has just a lot of discovering about themselves to do. So that is all obviously held up. But I do think they've become a little bit more interesting as they've started to figure some things out. And as we've learned about this team, I do want to say like their defense has actually quietly been very solid, not scary or dominant or elite or anything, but they have an identity. And that identity is Tavondre Sweat, who has quietly been a very nice hit for them in the second round. He's stayed out of trouble. He's stayed on the field, and he's playing well. He's been awesome to watch in run defense, demanding 2 gaps, eating up lanes, clearing up, rush lane opportunities for second-level defenders to make run stops. I mean, he's been great there. He's had some moments as a pass rusher. And, yeah, that was just a very interesting pick when they made it because they ended up picking him right around where my draft grade was on him as like a late first, early second round talent. But I think a lot of people, after he got a DUI like 2 weeks before the draft, a lot of people assumed he would fall for red flags. They take a gamble on him. And again, he's come in and actually given them an identity for that defense. And I think coaching wise, like they go with the whole, Ravens, Mike McDonald, system approach, and it's worked out for them for the most part. They've been a physical, scrappy defense. They also have an under-the-radar young corner, fifth-round rookie in Jarvis Brownlee out of Louisville has had to step up because L'Jarius Sneed's been unavailable. They've had a bunch of injuries back there. And yeah, they've been a very solid defense. I think they're very much heading in the right direction on that side of the ball. And then offensively, they've obviously just been quite a disaster. Their run game's been pretty good because Tony Pollard has just been out of nowhere, like unbelievable. He's actually been a really good signing for them. But in the last couple of weeks, since Will Levis came back, I mentioned this team has been a little bit more watchable, and that held up in this game against Minnesota last week as well. He has cleaned up his act a little bit, and he's giving you some of those exciting big throws. When Levis was playing for the first month, it was a disaster because, number one, you weren't getting the big plays. He wasn't unlocking that big arm, and you weren't getting any of these, schemed up plays that got you excited about, Callahan as an offensive play designer, getting big looks for Levis in the offense. You weren't getting that. And on top of that, every single week he was pulling a Jameis Winston and YOLOing the ball over to the other team. So the last couple of weeks, he's really cleaned that up, and you've seen a much better baseline of quarterback play. And they actually were right in this game against Minnesota. I'm not going to act like things have been perfect offensively, but he's back to that level where you're intrigued by the thought of him potentially being a franchise quarterback for you. And I do think as long as he plays like he has the last couple of weeks, you're in a spot where you're probably not drafting a quarterback in this draft. I don't know that the quarterbacks in this draft are all that different than a young Will Levis. I think you're better off to be patient with him, with Callahan, especially because inside this season we've seen some growth. And on top of Will Levis, they're really leaning into Calvin Ridley since DeAndre Hopkins was traded away. I think that's simplified things for Levis, not feeling like he has to get the ball to all these veterans. So that's been good. Ridley is 30 years old, but they did give him a pretty nice contract. And for a while, it was looking like they overpaid to get him. Now he's playing up to that contract. He's playing even above that contract. He's been really good the last couple of weeks for them. And you have the left side of the offensive line, at least, the J.C. Latham pick that I was hard on. Latham's been really good. And the second the Titans took him, I had a feeling that was probably going to happen because Callahan is that good of Bill Callahan is that good of an O-line coach. And week one, Latham comes out, looks like he did at Alabama, can't move his feet, can't block anyone. Callahan gets the tape, makes a couple adjustments with him. Latham gets to work, and he's been really solid. So, Latham at left tackle and Skoronski at left guard. You're hoping Cushenberry can settle in at center. He's had some ups and downs in his rookie season. But that's at least some stuff that the Titans have figured out what works for them, and they're building upon it, which is all you wanted to see for the Titans is understand going into your second offseason what you need to improve on, what parts of the roster need work. Very clearly, the right side of the offensive line has been catastrophic. It pretty much single-handedly lost them the game against the Vikings. I can't believe Nicholas Petit-Frere is still out there. He is bad enough that Coach Callahan is not going to be able to fix. Always has been. I can't explain that. He's one of the worst players playing in the NFL right now, if not the worst. And the right guard spot's been really tough too. So they got to fix that, and they got to just continue to find players defensively. I think another guy in that edge room would be really nice. I like what Arden Key has done for them. Harold Landry, I frankly have hardly noticed him this year. I'm looking at edge, right side of the offensive line, and then other playmakers beyond Ridley. But that's, starting to look at offseason needs and all that stuff. I think, obviously, in terms of the Titans, I didn't expect much for them. There were some Titans fans that were a little hopeful that these free agent pieces would all click. Some of them have, some of them haven't. But they're in a retooling, rebuilding, learning year, really. And it's going okay. I don't think it's going great. It's not going swimmingly. You're still kind of 1 foot in, maybe 1 foot out. 1 foot in, 1 foot out on the combination of Levis and Callahan, but things are going better as of late. So I think it's business as usual for the Titans. There's not any big sweeping reactions for how the season has gone for them. And I think we're good to move on to the Carolina Panthers, who started the season for me ranked 30th, and that felt like I was a lunatic diehard Panthers fan for putting them as high as 30. And it's been kind of a roundabout way to get to the point where I was kind of right about their offseason, where I think the Panthers did all of the right moves this offseason. I think abandoning any defensive assets you have to try to pump into the offense, make this a practical offense so that you can then get a fair evaluation of Bryce Young and a little bit of Dave Canales, your new offensive coach, which was a good hire. And then you build off of that. You then look forward to the next offseason to repair the defense. And some people said I was crazy. And for the first few weeks, I did look crazy because it did take a little while to get there. They benched Bryce Young. Kind of seemed like that was it. It was over, right? The Bryce era, after a season and 2 games, they were going to give up on the number 1 overall pick. Everyone was saying, oh, the Rams are going to trade for him. The Dolphins are going to trade for him. At least I said the Panthers are not trading Bryce Young. They're putting him in timeout. They'd be stupid to trade him for a 4th-round pick. They always were going to go back to him at some point. Now, Andy Dalton getting into a car wreck, fortunately everyone's okay, but that actually sped up their timeline. I think they were going to wait till after Germany probably to put Bryce Young in after the bye week, which would have been this week. But that timeline got sped up, and it kind of all worked out. Like, the idea that you were going to sit Bryce down, he was going to learn from Andy Dalton, see what it looks like for a veteran to run a team, how he interacts with the players, and it just runs the offense, right? Like, just this is a guy that's not going to come in and look overwhelmed and feel like the weight of the world is going to drown him out. Just for Bryce to see that it can be done on this offense, what it's supposed to look like. And for Bryce Young, I mean, a guy that's 22 years old, that's been kind of a silver spoon-fed prospect. Not that he doesn't have great work ethic. I think he does. But Bryce has never had to learn how to handle adversity, really. I mean, what's the biggest adversity that he had to face? That going from his sophomore year to his junior year, he lost his good wide receivers? Like, no. Like, he was at Alabama. He was the top quarterback in his class. Like, this is the first time really where he's failed. So I think that process actually showed a lot of maturity by Canales and Bryce Young. Andy Dalton deserves credit. And it's just kind of the stress of it all has been relieved. And that's really what it came down to with Bryce Young. Was it felt like every time you watched him, he's this small, frail quarterback that the weight of this entire organization was like weighing on his shoulders. And that's been lifted. And he's been playing more free. He's having fun, and he's playing well. He's playing on time. He's stepping up in the pocket. He's extending plays. He's got some of that confidence to get out of the pocket. And he's got a lot of that confidence because the offensive line is actually pretty damn good with a lot of the moves they made this offseason. So there were no expectations for the Panthers to be a good football team this year. The goal was for them to be a competent team that can get you to a spot where you can evaluate Bryce Young and let him develop. And it was never even like, yeah, Bryce Young is going to reward this team for picking him number 1 and he's going to be a superstar. We're too far away from having any sort of those conversations. But I think based on what you hoped how you hope this season to go, they've arrived now here where you kind of hope they would. And I think they'll win a couple more games the rest of the year. I'm excited to see Jonathan Brooks enter this running back rotation, give them a really good duo there behind a really good offensive line. And this offseason is going to turn into just defense, and maybe one other playmaker to replace the hole from Deontay Johnson traded away, because that obviously just wasn't a great fit. Especially after Jalen Coker kind of emerged. They felt like they didn't need Deontay Johnson anymore. They weren't going to extend him. So, hey, let's get another pick for him and let Bryce develop a chemistry with these other receivers that are going to be here for the extended period of time. So, I like what's going on in Carolina. I do. They've been a fun watch as someone that really likes Bryce Young and cheers for Bryce Young. All right. that does it for the bottom tier in the power rankings. We now climb up to tier 4, which is the bad but not number one pick bad tier. The New Orleans Saints have climbed out of the tankathon tier, winning their second game in a row since firing Dennis Allen. It's been a really unpredictably predictable season for the Saints, if that makes sense. I had them ranked 26th coming into the year. Here they find themselves 25th. They're 4-7. They're not a good football team. Pretty much exactly like I said on them, where they've got a bunch of old players. They're going to win some games. But where is this team going is kind of where I was at. And that's the overall takeaway from the Saints. But what's interesting about the Saints is their highs this year have been dominant highs, especially out the gate. They showed some really exciting stuff. Then they fell completely off the grid as they got injured to all hell offensively. They've gotten some guys back healthy offensively. They make the firing of Dennis Allen. They get a little bit rejuvenated. And now they've got 2 good wins in a row. They beat the Falcons, which is a good win. And then they pull away and end up dominating the Cleveland Browns this week, 35-14. So they are a team that, at least inside that locker room, they do exude, and I don't even think it's so much a talent difference compared to some of these other teams. I think it is still the leftovers of competent football teams, where this team does show up on game days at the Superdome with one of the best home field advantages in the league, and they will still come out and bring it. And there is a culture here in New Orleans that does still exist. The problem is where they're at in terms of all the veterans on the roster, the upside conversations with this team. But I do at least want to give them some credit for some of the good stuff they've done. They've had some dominant wins. And I did want to ask the question of how does that happen? What has led to the Saints actually looking like a really good football team some days? And frankly, Taysom Hill is really underrated as a football player, and honestly has been for a while. But dude, he's just really, really good. He's been this kind of gimmick joke that we just kind of laugh about for a long time. But I genuinely think he's he's kind of a superstar. I've compared his ability as a runner to Derrick Henry at times, and I'm not saying he's Derrick Henry. I'm not. I'm just saying he does have the same legitimate fear factor of a Derrick Henry, where this guy is 230 pounds. He runs pissed off, and he has legitimately elite traits. He is fast, strong. His acceleration is absurd. His acceleration is even a little different than Derrick Henry. Henry's a little bigger. But this offense with Taysom Hill, when he's been healthy, and when they were losing, he was not healthy. He was out of the lineup for a few weeks there when they were really bad. They really lean into him, and he himself is productive. I mean, he just had 130 yards pulling away from the Browns defense. He is a huge part of their red zone efficiency, of their short yardage efficiency. He himself is super productive. But I do think from a play calling perspective, with Clint Kubiak, who's shown a lot of promise this year, as someone to get excited about from New Orleans, I do think when Taysom's out there, it's just a much more natural play calling script for Kubiak, because he gives him his touches, but then he's out there and he's like, all right, but on this play, Taysom's going to be the lead blocker as a fullback, or we're going to put him out as a slot wide receiver, as a decoy. And I think it just helps kind of script the offense in a way that ends up being really effective. So frankly, I slept on Taysom Hill's impact on a football team, and I would say we probably all did, but Clint Kubiak has really done a good job to unlock him. And he is an elite. I know he's 34 years old and he's played quarterback this whole time, and he doesn't have the career established productivity, but this is maybe not elite, but this is something like a Deebo Samuel in his prime, a legitimate problem for defenses to deal with. I wish he was 25 and not 34 or 35 or whatever he is, because then you could actually look at him as more of a long-term sustainable star for this team. But as far as like how this year's offense is being so good, I think we have got to spend that time on Taysom Hill. And then the other thing on top of Taysom Hill is Derek Carr has dropped some dimes this year. I don't think he's necessarily playing over well on a macro scale, but he's got 4 or 5 like gorgeous, gorgeous deep balls that have changed games this year. He had a couple in that game a week ago over Atlanta. So he's still got some life as a starter in this league. If I'm a Saints fan, I don't want him back personally. And we'll see where that goes, but he could be an option for somebody else in a different kind of winning window. But I think those are the two main pieces, and Clint Kubiak being kind of the third piece of that for how this offense has just been better than I would have ever expected. But ultimately, while I'm trying to keep this as a encouraging conversation on the Saints, because I've been very down on the Saints, but they have won a couple games in a row and have done some fun stuff. Ultimately, as we transition the end of this conversation to like, where is this going and what makes for success for the Saints the rest of the year, I still have genuinely no idea what the 2025 Saints are supposed to be, because you look ahead to this offseason that is becoming more complicated, I think, as you win some football games here. I would much rather head into the offseason with a top 6 or 7 pick. With all these losing teams, they're going to be picking 8th, 9th, 10th in a draft class that falls off very quickly. So that's not great. That makes the offseason a little bit more complicated, because ultimately this team just needs young superstar talent. But a lot of the decisions this team has to make, even beyond finding a coach that wants this muddy job, you have a bunch of veteran players on this team that are huge, huge question marks for the future. And unfortunately, that actually starts with Chris Olave, who was shut down for the year with his 4th concussion. I mean, I think he'll be back. And I mean, concussions, I guess I don't fully understand why concussions are a sensitive subject. I don't see it as too different than like debating if a third ACL injury is going to be a problem for a guy. But I guess it's because we can't, it's a little bit more of a gray area. But I feel like some people like judge you from a morality standpoint when you discuss concussions. I don't know. That's a topic for a different day. I mean, if Olave happens to get a 5th concussion, and I obviously would never want that to happen. I hope he never gets hit hard again in his life. But if that happens, like, he's going to have to shut it down at, 3-4 years into his career, like a potential budding superstar, someone you traded a bunch of draft picks to go take highly. Like, that's a gut punch to this team. That's a massive question mark for this Saints team that, unfortunately, I do think you have to bring up. You've got Ryan Ramczyk, who hasn't played this year. What's his situation going to be? Everyone expects him to retire, so we'll see about that. I don't know why he hasn't retired yet, if that's going to be the case. You have, some of the, basically the identity of this defense are aging vets. They've already traded off Lattimore, but Demario Davis and Tyrann Mathieu are well on the back ends of their career age-wise. And then Taysom Hill is like the most prominent, dominant player on your offense right now, and he's a 34-year-old interesting piece, as we discussed. So if those are all major question marks, what are you left after that? I mean, you've got Fuaga at left tackle. I like him. You've got a 29-year-old center and Eric McCoy, who's a really good player. So you got a couple pieces on the O-line, but still a lot of work to do there. You've got no receivers. Rashid Shaheed can't stay healthy, unfortunately. I love Shaheed, but he can't stay healthy. You have Alvin Kamara, who you just extended at 30 years old. He's playing well, but that's interesting. And then on the defensive side of the ball, I mean, seriously, what are you left with after Davis and Mathieu? Carl Granderson's a good number 2 edge. I like Pete Werner as a linebacker. You got some solid young corners, but no one's emerged as like a star. I mean, you see what I'm saying? Like, I just don't understand the direction of this Saints team, and I don't know that they're ever going to change either, because here we go again. There is a world where, okay, they win. Let's say they finish the year. What do we got? 6 games left. What if they finish 6-10, 6-11, and talk themselves into like running this thing back and keep kicking the can down the road? And like, yeah, Olave will stay healthy. Derek Carr is just fine as our quarterback. And then you're right back in the same spot next year. We have this conversation seemingly every 3 weeks with the Saints. But it just hasn't changed. So they've had a roundabout way of getting here, because they have had weeks where they've been a lot better as a football team than I thought they would, and I want to acknowledge that. But I still don't know where that leads them, or what that means for the future. But hey, you climbed up a spot in the power rankings, so that's exciting for the Saints fans, I guess. All right, number 24, it's Jets time. This is obviously going to go down as one of my worst takes ever. I picked the Jets to go to the Super Bowl out of the AFC this year. I ranked them number 5. Thought this team was going to be awesome. Went at it with people on Twitter. I had the whole deep dive. Like, I was in on this Jets team. I was bought in. And my God, did this blow up in my face. And, how did we get here is the big question. Well, it's been discussed a lot throughout this year. It's a lot of different reasons. At the core of it is I just put too much faith in the New York Jets to be different, to not be the Jets of old, to not completely fall apart the second they had expectations. I think there's obviously a broken, rotted foundation that is tied to the ownership of this team, which we've seen Woody Johnson step in and like completely go nuts, basically, with, the Saleh firing was at the worst possible time, I think, where I think this team felt pretty optimistic coming off of that road loss in Minnesota. They were 2-3. They were a game behind Buffalo for first place. They had started slow in that game, but second half, the defense came alive. The offense came alive in the second half. They just couldn't finish it. And then they come in and just blow up the coaching staff. Like, Ulbricht's over his head as a head coach right now, stepping in middle of the season, asked short notice to handle that job. It's just, I think that's the core of this is ownership, curse, Jets, all that. But it's not just that. It's, Aaron Rodgers. The off-field stuff with Aaron Rodgers was something I didn't account for being as big of an issue as it is. Because I do think Aaron Rodgers, the quarterback, has been okay. He's probably been a little worse than I projected, but not nearly as bad as the people on the internet would tell you he's been. I think he's been about if you asked me before this week, I would have said about the 14th best quarterback. If you asked me after last week against Indy, where he just looked horrible for the first half, I would say about the 17th best quarterback in the league this year. And I think he's starting to check out a little bit, not stepping into his throws, that kind of stuff. But I think if this version of Aaron Rodgers was just playing on last year's Jets team, and you remove any sort of off-field drama that comes with Aaron Rodgers, and you just put this quarterback on last year's Jets team, they're a 10, 11 win playoff team. Like, that can't be crazy at all. They were 7-10 with Zach Wilson. But all the off-field drama and baggage that he comes with, and it's not even necessarily been drama, but the baggage in terms of he's got to run the show. He's got to be coach, GM, player, do things his way. he didn't learn at all from the Matt LaFleur experience in Green Bay. Because if you go back to the last year with Mike McCarthy, this is what the Packers offense looked like. What we see with the Jets here, that offense that never scores in the first quarter because they have no scripted offense, and it's just inside runs and RPOs and back shoulder throws to the sideline. Like that was, and not attacking the middle of the field. That was Rodgers' offense at the end of it in Green Bay, because it used to work for him way back when, but the league has changed, right? And teams understood his tendencies and what he wants to do. You got to be able to adjust. Well, Matt LaFleur forced Rodgers to learn the offense again, learn the NFL again. And Rodgers played along. He won a couple MVPs, had some great teams in Green Bay, but he didn't want to do that anymore. He wanted to just rewind the clock to 2016 and do what he's always done. And that meant bringing in a yes-man offensive coordinator in Nathaniel Hackett, getting all his buddies that are going to listen to what he says. And you can't do that. You can't be a quarterback in the NFL, the offensive coordinator, and the GM. You just can't. I don't care how smart and how talented you are, and clearly is not as talented as he once was either. So it's been really hard to watch this offense. And then once you can also kind of move on from the Aaron Rodgers conversation, because he's obviously been a major part of the issue here. This defense is just bad. Ever since they fired Saleh, they've just been bad. Like, there's some metrics you can look at. They're like bottom 3 defensively. They're extremely soft. The tough grittiness that they had under Saleh, even in a year last year where, things could have gone south, right? Rodgers gets hurt. They easily could have gone south, but they were extremely tough. And that's gone. Like, they get pushed around at the line of scrimmage. They get ran all over. And that's obviously a huge issue. And then guys just aren't playing well. Like Quinnen Williams, the first 6 weeks of the season was nowhere to be found. He's showing up recently. Sauce Gardner, completely fallen off. Then you get into the GM decisions. Okay, why did they let John Franklin Myers go? He was like a key piece of that D-line and the run defense. What was the point of letting him go? The Hassan Reddick acquisition was a huge mistake. Bryce Huff, they botched that whole deal. And that's where you get to Joe Douglas kind of getting fired here. So many fingers to be pointed, such an overall disaster, such a colossal disappointment, and such a bad take by me to have had this team as high as I did coming into the year. And I'm sorry, Jets fans, I got you built up on this team. But I'm just kind of numb to it at this point. So where does it go from here? That's the other interesting part of this conversation. Well, there's 3 major kind of timestamps basically for what we need to learn about for this offseason. Number 1 is who the hell is running this team, the ownership. Woody Johnson is, I guess, potentially going to be a part of the Trump administration. So, let's hope for America's sake that Woody Johnson stays with the Jets for Jets fans' sake. I mean, what do you prefer? An idiot running your country, or an idiot running your football team? I don't know. You got to pick your poison on that one, I guess. But politics and all that aside, ownership is potentially in flux. And everything I've heard is people slightly prefer the other Johnson, but it's not much better. But that's got to get sorted. And then, is Aaron Rodgers back with this team? That's another massive, massive question, right? My gut tells me yes, because I don't know what the alternatives are. I mean, maybe this team would draft one of these rookies. And maybe if Rodgers is back, they draft a rookie anyway. But my gut tells me Rodgers wants to be back, that he wants to be back with Devontae Adams and Lazard. And, he just built this massive estate out in New Jersey. My gut is telling me he wants to stay in New York. Do the Jets want him back? I actually, it all comes down to the ownership and the conversations and who the new coach is. And basically, can Aaron Rodgers humble himself? Can you reach a point where Rodgers accepts that he needs to take a step back? He doesn't get to have a say in terms of who his coordinator is and who his coach, who his receivers are and all that stuff, or certainly not a large say. I mean, if you give him a list of 3 guys and he says, yeah, I think that guy would be best for that, like maybe you listen to his opinion, but you certainly don't say, hey, go pick your offensive coordinator like you did with Hackett. If Rodgers can humble himself for a year and say, I don't want to go out on bottom, but I'll take a step back. I'll just play quarterback. I'll try to focus here. And I still think there's definitely a world where Aaron Rodgers is the best quarterback option for the Jets in 2025, because what are the other options? It's either hitting on one of these rookies where this class seems like a crapshoot, or Derek Carr? I mean, look, I get people hate on Rodgers, but is he really better than Derek Carr? If anything, that's a push, and I don't see them moving on from Rodgers to go bring in Carr. I don't know if that makes a ton of sense. Maybe they do it if Rodgers can't humble himself, for sure. But that's the number 2 question is, can you get Aaron Rodgers to wake up to the fact that, hey, you're not what you used to be, and you're really bad at this whole coach GM thing. Like, you just are. So that's the number 2 question. And if he can't buy into whatever the next stage of this Jets team is, and he can't just be a player on this team, then you got to cut ties, because that's just not healthy as you're looking to turn a corner on a new version of this team. It's just not healthy to have Rodgers in there doing what he's doing. So that's it's an ownership Rodgers thing. That if you don't have a whole lot of faith that that's going to work out, I can't really blame you. So hopefully Rodgers can kind of, listen and humble himself a little bit. And then number 3, of course, is what coach wants this job. Again, it comes down to what those internal discussions are looking like. If Rodgers is genuine and I'll take a step back. I don't need any power. I won't be mad about it. I'm going to play for one more year, try to go out on top. And ownership is taking a step back, and Woody Johnson's, working for the White House. That actually, I think, is a little bit more of an attractive job for a coach, because the roster is extremely talented. I do believe that. I know they've had some issues. You got to work on the interior of the D line. It can't just be Quinnen Williams and nobody else, so you're not just getting run all over. But I mean, if Rodgers is back, Devontae's back. You got Garrett Wilson. You've invested in this offensive line. You hope Olu takes a step in year 2. You're pretty good offensively. It's a good spot too, where you could draft one of these quarterbacks to develop to be your future quarterback. Sit him for a year and put him in a spot where if Rodgers just sucks next year, you'd put the rookie in, right? Like, that's not a completely horrible situation, kind of like a Michael Penix, Kirk Cousins type of deal. And obviously, defensively, you got a lot to work with. So it's a horrible opportunity in terms of ownership and Aaron Rodgers being there, but it is an appealing job, I think, being the big market team that does have a lot of young talent. So it really could go in so many different directions. Rodgers could leave. Nobody wants to work there because ownership is meddling, and you get a bad coaching candidate, and this team starts to bottom out a little bit. Rodgers could stay. You do what we just described. Or ownership steps up. They kick Rodgers out because he's being can't find the word. He's being stubborn. So you kick him out. You bring in a new coach that's got all the power, and that could be a good situation too for a rebuild. You're not going to be any good next year, but it's just going to be fascinating to see play out because this ownership group is just so unpredictable. You can say what they should do, but is that what they will do? I think they've shown historically no. And that's where the core of the frustration is with the Jets. But yeah, let's move on to another AFC East team, the New England Patriots. Kind of the opposite. Humble, young, excited quarterback on a roster that lacks talent for the most part. And a ascending coach that's trying to do their best on this team. So the Patriots actually started as my 32 ranked team, or 31st, depending when you watched. I originally had the Commanders, and then when the Patriots traded away Judon, and then Barmore got named out for the year, or at least that he was going to miss most of the season, I kind of jumped ship and lowered the Patriots to the bottom. And I would say, given that, I mean, this season's going as well as you could have pretty much possibly dreamed for a Patriots fan, because you had to have figured the defense wasn't going to be great. Probably not as good as it was last year. You lost some pieces, and Belichick was gone. I think to assume that Gerard Mayo was going to step in and just repeat a top 10 defense with a relatively talentless unit was going to be really damn tough. And the Patriots defense has just had some ups and downs, but I do think that they've done some good stuff. And Mayo has shown that he can continue the Belichick system that, it's aged throughout the years, but this whole kind of 5-1 defense, the multiple safety units, the way that they've approached defense for the last 3 or 4 years in New England, he can continue to build off of that. So, you pair that with Keon White having a breakout year, Christian Gonzalez absolutely looking like the real deal in year 2, and Barmore gets back in the lineup. You got some pieces to build around. So I think defensively, you're satisfied with how things have gone for the Patriots. And offensively, this was all that mattered, was just please don't give us a Bryce Young, Zach Wilson season from Drake May, knowing that this offense has nothing to work with. This is a garbage offensive line. It's a garbage group of receivers. And a play caller that was very unproven coming into the year. I'll just leave it at that. I was terrified for Drake May, and I love Drake May. I criticized the Commanders for not taking Drake May, regrettably. But I was scared that this was not going to be a situation that could work for Drake May. And he has stepped in and elevated this offense to competency, to an impressive degree. I mean, he's really checked every box you could possibly imagine. He has a firm understanding of the offense. He's improved his footwork, the way he's stepping into these digs, and his accuracy because of his improved mechanics. That was a big thing with him, was he would just spray balls because he would throw these fadeaway throws like Jordan Love does. And it was like, well, he could fix that by improving his mechanics, and that was a big focus for them, and they've done that. Alex Van Pelt, quarterback background, has done a great job with Drake May there. But, the playmaking, the athleticism, the big throws, I mean, he's just looked good. He has looked, they stayed put at number 3. There was multiple teams, the Giants, the Vikings especially, were like, please, we want Drake May. We'll give you a lot of picks for him. Patriots said, well, we need those picks, but we can't pass up on Drake May. And my God, was that a good decision, because this team would be, looking at the number 1 pick probably without Drake May. I mean, they'd be in that top 5 conversation. And you just weren't going to get a quarterback prospect as good as Drake May, even if he was the 3rd guy available in last year's draft. So things are, I would say, going just fine for the Patriots. They're 3-8, so I wouldn't say me being so low on them coming into the year was wrong. Like, clearly, I wasn't high on Jalen Polk. I wasn't high on Caden Wallace. Their 2nd and 3rd round picks that were supposed to help Drake May. I wasn't high on those picks. They've done nothing. Polk's been bad. I thought they'd have some holes on defense. Like, that all has come true. They're 3-8, but there's just a lot of really bad teams in the league, and they've, been going in the right direction, unlike a lot of teams that we just talked about. As far as the rest of this year is concerned, what constitutes a good result for the rest of the year for this team? Just keep winning, keep building. I can't say keep winning. I don't know that's necessarily the best case for the Patriots. Get that pick as high as possible, but just keep doing what you've been doing the last couple of weeks. A 28-22 loss to the Rams where Drake May looks good, great. More of that is just fine for the Patriots. What I would love to see, though, is some of these young players that they drafted do something. There's 4 rookies in this draft class that have given them nothing. And it's like, can any of these guys step up? Can Jalen Polk turn it around? He was the 34th pick in the draft. I do think he was a reach, but can he settle in and learn how to play football at the next level? Can Caden Wallace get on the field? I mean, I don't know if Wallace is hurt Patriots fans. Maybe he is. But the fact that they are trotting out Vidarian Lowe and then the other guy I've never heard of, Demontre Jacobs. Okay, it does look like Caden Wallace is hurt. I don't know when that happened. That got swept under the rug. So I can't be too hard on Caden Wallace if he's been hurt. But can he get back out there? Can you get just a piece on that offensive line, a young piece that you feel good about heading into the offseason? That would be great to see. Javon Baker is the other receiver they took. I don't think he's been healthy. He hasn't been available. Even like Jaheim Bell, can he get healthy and get on the field? Because I thought he was an explosive like wing tight end that could be a nice complement to someone like Hunter Henry to just be a piece in that offense. So I would love to see some of this young talent offensively show up with Drake May as Drake May is playing better, so that you just don't have literally everything to look at offensively. I mean, they have 2, maybe 3 players that I would say are definitely starting caliber players for the Patriots next season. Drake May, Hunter Henry, I guess, and Michael Onwenu. Beyond that, you could argue they need 8 players on that offense. So just anybody from this draft class getting healthy and playing well would be nice. Well, I also got a shout out to Demario Douglas. That's hard on Demario Douglas. Demario Douglas is a starting caliber slot wide receiver, but you want him to be the 9th best player on your offense, not the 3rd best as he is right now. So there's New England. Let's go ahead and talk about the Chicago Bears, who ranked 22nd here in the rankings for Week 12. And they lose a heartbreaker to the hated rival Packers. They lose 20-19 as Green Bay blocks a field goal on a day where the Bears got things back on track. And I think went, back to looking kind of like that team that was 4-2 and had playoff hopes. Obviously, a tough loss to stomach in the sense that that ended their season. Their schedule is way too hard for them at 4-6 to get back into the playoff conversation. But it was a reminder doing this exercise. I had them 19th coming into the year. This was not necessarily supposed to go perfectly for Chicago, and it hasn't gone perfectly. This has been, I would say, kind of if a 10 was going to be the world where Caleb is CJ Stroud, superstar rookie, defense becomes amazing, Bears are great, like a best case scenario for the Bears. If that's a 10 and a 1 is like complete disaster, this is like a 5 in terms of how this team season could have gone. I think it's not too far off of an average outcome for the Bears if you were to talk about what could have happened coming into the year, hence why I had them ranked 19th. You also have to acknowledge with this game, they are now a blocked field goal and a Hail Mary away from being 6-4 with possession of the 7 seed in the NFC, because they would have wins over Washington and Green Bay, who are the 2 teams ahead of them. So I understand a lot of things hurt for the Bears right now. A lot of the talk has been about who's the next head coach, firing Eberflus. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute because I don't necessarily disagree. But I don't think this has necessarily been a worst case scenario for the Bears. And at this point, there's been more good from Caleb in his rookie season than bad. And I do think getting Shane Waldron out of there Had to happen. I didn't like that hire from the beginning. I never liked what I saw in Seattle. I thought they underachieved based on the talent they had. And we obviously saw that in Chicago here as well. And I can't really explain why Chicago was so much better offensively last week against Green Bay, but they just were. Like, I don't know that they necessarily did too much different from a play calling scheme perspective, but whatever it was, the guys just played better. I mean, Caleb played so much better, played so much more within himself. He made plays with his feet, got that pocket presence back, like, felt like he was starting to second guess when he could be a playmaker under Shane Waldron. Something I think was said to him like, hey, don't forget what makes you great. It's really good to see that in the Packers game. Roma Dunze was 3 for 3 on contested catches in this game. I think from a film perspective, he might have had his best game as a Bear. He's been heating up lately. The offensive line just showed up against the Packers. They get the left tackle back out there healthy, and the right tackle. Those guys had been out when they were struggling. So they were picking up stunts, blocking much better. So things just ran better with Waldron gone. And with this performance, where I would say the offense generally played well. Not amazing, but played well. With that performance, you're not panicking about Caleb Williams. He's had his rookie moments. He needs to continue to develop his processor and get better at aspects of this position in this league. But as far as rookie quarterback seasons are concerned, you can do a lot worse than what Caleb is doing. So, I don't think there's like necessarily a need for full-scale panic on the Bears, but with the season starting 4-2, with the expectations that were placed and the trajectory they were on, you are obviously a little bit disappointed. What matters for the rest of the year for the Chicago Bears? That is a big question. Because what's better for this team? You play well. You got to remember, their schedule's really hard. They got the Vikings twice. They got the Lions twice. They got the Niners on the schedule. They got to play the Packers again in Lambeau. This team is not going to the playoffs. It is not going to happen. They're too far behind. They're 2.5 games behind two teams that they have now lost to, Green Bay and Washington. It's just not going to happen. I mean, it would take a miracle for this team to be good enough to win the games they need to get to 10 wins, maybe 11 for a wild card in the NFC. If they were in the AFC, sure, I'd be saying like the Bengals or whatever, like, yeah, maybe they could figure it out. But that's just not reasonable to think about. So if you look at this practically, the best case scenario, what matters for the Bears moving forward is that they keep losing games by blocked field goals and Hail Marys and stupid shit. Because then your pick's higher, but more importantly, Eberflus is gone from an ownership group that doesn't like to fire head coaches. And it's tough because Eberflus deserves to be a head coach in the NFL. I know. I know that's not a popular opinion in Chicago. He is one of the 32 best head coaches in the league. He's not the right coach for the Bears and where they got to go. He's just not. You want to pair Caleb with an offensive mind that can develop him because there are just aspects of his game that just need development. And you want not just a good offensive mind, but you want a consistent offensive mind with the right mentality as well. Because I think there's been a point that's been thrown around where they're asking him to play like a game manager a lot of the time because that's Eberflus's mindset as a defensive head coach. And his defense is good, right? He's good at the thing he does. That's why they kept him, because the Bears' defense was really good last year, and they're good again this year. Maybe better than their roster talent, in my opinion. But again, not the right coach for the Bears. So my fear for the Bears is you finish 8-9, 7-10, but you finish strong against really good opponents, and the defense plays great, and the Bears say, yeah, we'll go find an offensive coordinator somewhere. The hell you won't. The hell you won't. Teams, last year was the year to do that, where you actually had Cliff Kingsbury out there, Arthur Smith was out there. I mean, what are you going to do? Hire Doug Peterson Okay, good luck with that. Have fun with that. Yeah, so to me, that's what is a best case scenario, is this team just loses close games, pull the trigger on making a change of head coach, especially when Ben Johnson said this was the job he wanted. You get Ben Johnson, the hype on this team is going to be off the rails. Off the rails. Especially if you've got a good enough pick to maybe find another piece on the O-line. You could really be in business there. All right, so we do make a tier jump up into Schrodinger's box of cats, which I won't explain. It's the tier of teams that are both dead and alive. That some are going to show up dead at the end of the year, some are going to show up alive. We've done the Schrodinger breakdown before. We don't need to do it again for this show. We got enough to talk about. But kicking off this tier of teams that have some life in them, the Indianapolis Colts, coming in at number 21. And the Colts started the year ranked 16th for me. So after this big win over the Jets, where Richardson comes off the benching, and really Richardson, like, he started slow. Like, he's got the play rolling out where he misses the short throw to, I think, Kylan Granson, sails it over his head. You know, the passing game wasn't doing too much for the first 3 quarters of this game. You're kind of like, yeah, well, they're going through it. At least they're competitive in this game. They had the lead at half, all that. But the Jets started to score in the second half, and then Anthony Richardson went God mode on the last 2 drives. So they're down 8 in the fourth quarter, and he makes 3 plays in this game. He's falling backwards on a rollout. He makes a beautiful throw on the run to Mo Alley Cox that not a ton of quarterbacks can make. He throws a beautiful dig in-breaker to Alec Pierce, who continues to play well for this team. He throws a strike to Josh Downs that goes for a touchdown on a slant, where it's just on time, on the money, accuracy being so important to see from him. And then they end up down 5 again because they didn't get the 2-point conversion. The Jets go get a field goal. They're down 5 with 2.5 to go. And he hits Alec Pierce on a double move, which, again, good scheme. Pierce made a great play, but that's a throw that Richardson has sailed this season. So he gets a big completion there. And then right after that, he hits Alec Pierce again from an evaluation standpoint, probably the biggest play from Richardson from a tape eval standpoint, where he throws kind of a bending seam route into the second level of the defense with anticipation, where he's throwing it to a space, expecting Pierce to get there, puts it on the money, and that sets up what ended up being the go-ahead touchdown. So, I mean, welcome back, Anthony Richardson, and welcome back to the Indianapolis Colts, because this season was always going to be about evaluating Anthony Richardson. That's why it was such a bummer when they sat him down. But I do think, as we've seen with Bryce Young, as we've seen with Anthony Richardson, and I was hard on the Colts for benching Richardson, but opinions can change, right? I think we've seen this year that if the guy's young enough, if they haven't let the whole cat out of the bag, if you will, if they're green enough and they're mature enough, putting a guy down for a couple weeks, sitting him down, and just letting him take a breath, see a veteran do it, and then go back out there, get back to work, it can really work. And I'm hoping that that's what we're seeing with Richardson, just as we've seen with Bryce here. But yeah, it's just good for the Colts to kind of have some life on their season. Just life in the sense of, okay, we're watching Richardson. All these young receivers are freaking awesome, man. Like, Pierce was huge in this game. He's been a really nice piece for them. Him as a 3, I can get behind. Josh Downs, good to see Richardson connect with Josh Downs, because they've had a hard time getting on the same page. So seeing Flacco come in and throw the ball to Downs, I think, was useful for Richardson. Be like, hey, it doesn't have to be that hard. Just throw it to your incredible slot receiver that's always open and catches everything. Yeah, it's not a bad idea. And Adonai Mitchell, the last couple of weeks, has really started to do some stuff. So, I mean, and Pittman hasn't even been healthy. He's kind of an afterthought right now. So, you got a lot to work with here. You got an O-line, you got Steichen, who I think we still think the world of. You got playmakers. And you're alive. I mean, they're 5-6. They're a game behind Denver. Like, They are not out of this thing. So they got a lot to play for in terms of the future and for this season, and things are back on track. It was just a big, big week for the Colts. Things could have very much flipped if they lost to the Jets. So just kind of right, I would say, yes, I had them ranked 16th coming into the year. And I would say in terms of how we got here to 21, unfortunately, for the first 10 weeks of the year, the Richardson experiment was not working. So we're recording this at the point that they're kind of right back to, I think, how you felt about them coming into the year a little bit. But in terms of ranking them from a power rankings perspective, the league framework has just changed a little bit. But I think in terms of where you're at in the Colts, they have eventually arrived at the same spot. It just kind of like the Panthers took them a little bit to get there. So the rest of the year, it's all about continuing the young players on offense narrative. I do have one thought on the defense, though, before I transition to our next team. More of an offseason conversation, because I don't think the Colts defense is terrible, but I would love to see this team acknowledge, hey, there's some really good defensive coordinator candidates out there that would be big upgrades from Gus Bradley, and go make a change. Because this Gus Bradley defense just isn't working. It's just not. They've tried to change a little bit. They only run cover 3 like 32% of the time, so every 3 plays, as opposed to like 50% of the time as they've been. So they're getting into more too high stuff and a little more man-to-man, and that's great, but it hasn't been very effective. They don't coach it very well. I think Bradley is comfortable running cover 3, and they only blitz 13% of the time. So I would love to see this team either go, like, can they get Eberflus back? That would be fantastic. Can they get him back as a DC for a couple years? Would love that. Or can they go get like Dennis Allen? Maybe. I would love to see them make a defensive coordinator change, because I'm jumping ship on Gus Bradley at this point. All right, number 20 is an interesting one. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And heading into the year, I ranked the Bucs 23rd. And I called them this year's playoff team that was most likely to miss the playoffs the next year, right? They won their division. They went to the playoffs. I was low on this Bucs team. I was a Bucs hater coming into the year. I was like, I don't know if Baker's going to settle in, like he did last year. And, I saw some holes on the roster. I wasn't so sure about the coaching, losing Canales and all that. I was low on the Bucs. Not that I hate the Bucs. I like the Bucs, but I was definitely low on this team. And here they are, ranking 20th, heading into week 12. And I could be sitting here saying, see, I was right about the Bucs. But I really want to say I was wrong about the Bucs, because if this team didn't get injured to all shit, I would have been wrong about the Bucs. And I think they probably, even if they've lost to Atlanta twice, they've been their Achilles heel this year. They probably are in a pretty good spot to win this division if they aren't injured to all hell. Because Baker's been awesome. Chris Godwin was fully back before he got hurt again. And defensively, it feels like they have just not been able to get their starters out there this year. And I don't love how Bowles has tried to protect his backup, like defensive backs. I don't think they've managed their injuries well. Like he's taking backup corners and leaving them on an island with the opposing team's number 1 wide receivers. Like, I'd like to see a little more adjustment from Todd Bowles instead of just saying, nope, we're going to run our stuff no matter who's out there. So that's been a little bit discouraging. But for the most part, I feel like the Bucs are ranked 20th because of injuries, not because of anything that they've done wrong. Like, I think they've unlocked the run game. The Bucky Irving pick has been so fantastic. You've got a guy like Yaya Diaby that's actually like emerging as an edge presence for that team that they've desperately needed. But the defense just hasn't been able to put it all together. Baker, again, has been mostly good this year with some hiccup weeks. So it really is just an injury thing for the Bucs. They've lost 2 games losing the coin toss in overtime where they didn't get to touch the football. And I just think that's bad luck. I just do, given my opinions on NFL overtime rules. So, yeah, I don't have too much else to say on the Bucs. They're coming off the bye week, and they're in a pretty tough spot. They're 4-6. and just injured. So they're just not as good as they could be, but that's really how I feel they got here. Let's go to Atlanta, sticking in the NFC South, because they are dropping 6 spots in the power rankings this week. They fall down to the 19th ranking, which is 6 spots below. If we did this last week, they would have been ranked where they started at number 13. That's where I had them heading into the year. I moved them up a little bit following the Justin Simmons signing. They go get Matthew Judon. That moved them from I think 15 to 13 in the rankings. But anyway, they settle in here at 19 after just a horrible loss in Denver. And I bet on Atlanta for my Patreon picks this week. I had Atlanta. I thought they were better than Denver. I feel like they've shown some really good stuff and have been heading in the right direction with some tough losses in recent weeks. Thought last week was just kind of a weird, sloppy trap game loss in New Orleans. These are not good. And losing to Denver in Denver is not necessarily bad, but the way they lost, they got blown out 38-6 and just couldn't hang. And honestly, the analysis on that game is just they were losing every single one-on-one matchup. Offensive, defensive line, both getting obliterated. They had no pass rush. They couldn't protect Kirk. And the Broncos secondary swarmed these Falcons receivers. Really a discouraging week if the idea is this Atlanta team has some talent. They didn't win any matchups. And they got to find some answers. I mean, especially offensively, I was pretty discouraged. If you watch that game, you say, all right, well, Pat Surtain's going to follow Drake London around. That's a good matchup for Surtain. A big physical corner, a shutdown corner on a guy like Drake London, who's just not a great athlete. You know, Surtain has had he has success against most receivers, but those types, that's like a walk in the park for Pat Surtain. And then Riley Moss getting kind of bodied by, Darnell Mooney getting kind of mossed by, Darnell Mooney getting locked down by Riley Moss. I don't know why that was hard to say, but anyway, you would think, okay, but Atlanta still has a run game with Bijan, and they have Kyle Pitts. Okay, Kyle Pitts should be able to step up against a defense that I would say their weaknesses are safety and linebacker. Yeah, I think that's about right. So where the hell was Kyle Pitts? Nowhere to be found. So the inability to kind of tap into that third lever was really frustrating for Atlanta, and that's been inconsistent all year round. Kyle Pitts has made some big plays, but he's had some games where he disappears too. So for me, as you look forward, Atlanta has become disappointing in the last few weeks. 3 weeks ago, it looked like everything was on track. Kind of just a good offense, bad defense, as we expected. A team that was going to run away with the NFC South. But they gotta find answers. They got to settle in. I think offensively, you got to be more adaptable. You got to create some easier looks for Kirk somehow. And that's not what I'm getting paid to do, but that is what Zach Robinson is there to do, scheme stuff up. And defensively, I mean, let's face it, as much talent as the Falcons lack, you want to see some growth from Raheem Morris's defense at some point in the season, and they're going in the wrong direction. So they got to get better on one side of the ball, if not both. But as far as what matters the rest of this year, they got to win this division. I mean, that would be an utter embarrassment if they can't win this division with how bad it is after they've beaten Tampa twice. Tampa's been injured to all hell. I mean, if they can't finish strong and win this division, that would be an utter embarrassment. And then you get to the playoffs, probably get bounced by whatever the wild card team is, because all 3 of the wild card teams are better teams than Atlanta right now. And then you're going to have to kind of evaluate Kirk and decide if it's Michael Penix time next year. I don't think that's crazy. And if that happens, that Penix pick could look a lot better pretty quickly because, frankly, outside of the 2 Bucs games, Kirk has been a below-average quarterback that has really struggled to move. You load up those Bucs games, he looks like fucking Peyton Manning. But for some reason, they haven't been able to do that against any other system. I don't know why, but they got to figure out how to do that. Okay, number 18, the Miami Dolphins. They started the season ranked number 8th and now find themselves ranked 18th. And a big part of this is injuries. which have derailed really their hopes. I mean, they're not completely out of it. They're 2.5 games out of the wild card. AFC East is effectively clinched at this point with Buffalo winning. But they have obviously, I mean, the Tua injury derailed a lot of this team's season. Now, that's not all of it, frankly, because he was down for 4 or 5 weeks? I think it was 5 weeks. You see playoff caliber teams, their quarterback goes down, they're able to steal a couple wins and keep themselves in it. That didn't happen with Miami. And I think there's two things there in terms of how did we get here? How do we go from number 8 to number 18? And why aren't we in a situation like the Packers where, okay, Love goes down, but the second he comes back, you're kind of right back to where you had them. If that would, if that was the case with the Dolphins, okay, Tua's back, we're great again. You would find them in the top 10, like we're going to see with Green Bay here. That hasn't been the case with Miami because they haven't been that good with Tua. I just don't think Tua's been that good. And honestly, McDaniel, I think, showed, I don't want to say his true colors, but he showed some concerns when Tua went down and this offense shut down. Like Mike McDaniel's supposed to be offensive genius, takes a deadbeat Tua and lifts him up to like competency. Like Tua and his skill set, as we've talked about, is doing a lot more heavy lifting with this offense than I think we realize. Certainly I realize, but they have not been out scheming teams this year, really much at all. They have won with screens and defense and run game. Like they do have a creative run game. They create some chunk runs and some explosives on the ground with a guy like Achane and their screen game and all that. It's not that they don't do anything good schematically, but they don't have those big passing plays down the field that McDaniel is scheming up, a passing game. And without that, you're just not very potent offensively, even if you have all this speed. On top of that, Tyreek Hill's 31 years old. I don't know that he's necessarily what he used to be. I think if he was, you would see at least one of these deep completions. I mean, I know teams are accounting for it, but you would think him and Tua would have been able to connect once outside of week 1 when everybody's fresh. I mean, where have been those beautiful go balls where Tyreek, even if the corner's playing off, Tyreek stacks them and Tua leads them. And part of that's on Tua, but Tyreek has not been a super weapon this year. He just hasn't. And Jalen Waddle's really struggling. He's really struggling. He has had horrible hands this year, maybe some of the worst hands of starting receivers in the league. And then you've got a defense that's doing what they can, but their edge group has been super injured, and you kind of figured that was going to happen coming into the year. But Jalen Phillips getting hurt again was a gut punch. So I think for Miami, they definitely were not the number 8 team in the league coming into the year, and I think 18th is much more accurate for the caliber of team that they are. It's not that they're bad, but they're not as potent offensively, and no one's afraid of this defense, even if they're doing what they can there. And with that, they are quietly in a really, really tough spot. Like they are up there with like the Raiders and maybe a couple other teams in terms of like teams in the worst spot, like the Saints. Because, look, let's face it. I talked about it earlier. Everybody gets all touchy-feely when you talk about concussions, but Tua himself puts any team in a really, really tough spot. Because as a player, he's an average quarterback. He's like the 16th to 18th best quarterback in the league. I think he's played like that since he's come back. He's fine, but he's going to make some bad mistakes. He's not an epic playmaker. He's just a limited player. He just is. If you argue that as a Dolphins fan right now, I just genuinely don't know what to tell you. You pair that with the concussions and the fact that you just paid him a massive contract, it's a scary spot because, man, if he gets another one, and he's throwing his head in there, making tackles, like not regretting it. This is not a player playing like he really wants to protect himself. Like he's refusing to wear the soft cap thing. Like he's acting like this is not a big deal. It's a big deal. So that puts you in a compromising situation, but you start to add up some of the things I said where, okay, McDaniel, maybe has he lost a little bit of his magic? It happens. I mean, he came up with some really creative stuff. The league adjusted to it. It's hard to do that every year. You take that out. Do you have a true super genius in Mike McDaniel? I think this year we've started to question that. We'll see what he can do moving forward. But, okay, so that's your combination with Tua. And then the fact that Tyreek Hill is 31 years old, that's not great. I don't love that. And this defense, like, yeah, they've been competent, but you're out there. They're competent because of Jalen Ramsey, Calais Campbell, Jordan Poyer, Kendall Fuller, Zach Sealer's getting up there in age. Like, these are not long-term pieces. Your edge group can't stay healthy, and they're highly invested in pieces. You're going to have to make a financial decision on Jalen Phillips, coming off a second season-ending injury. And Bradley Chubb, I mean, he was an injury risk when they acquired him, and he hasn't been able to get back out there. So, again, Miami's in a really, really compromising situation, and I'm just not a believer. Like, I'll just say it. Like, I don't see upside with this current version of this team, as we talked about. And I don't think it's really trending in the right direction. So, as far as what matters for the rest of the year, I mean, sure, you be competitive, blah, 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 try to keep things interesting. But for me, it's you gotta see young players playing well. You gotta start feeling better about can Cam Smith start playing better? Their second round corner from a year ago. He's been really bad when he's played. Chop Robinson's given them a little something. That's a positive. But you need some building blocks here, man, because the foundation is starting to fall apart before our very eyes. And maybe I'm calling that a little too bit early, but I don't know, man. It kind of reminds me of the Rams. I made a video about the Rams in 2018 about how we need to talk more about how this thing is maybe going to fall apart. Not to mention Teron Armstead, by the way. They're really their only good offensive lineman is 34, 35 years old and has a serious injury history. So like I was saying, the cookie crumbs are there that this could really fall apart. I'm trying to over dramatize this to say if we're sitting here and the Dolphins have the number one pick in 2026 and Tua's either not on the Dolphins or retired and McDaniel's an offensive coordinator somewhere else, it sounds pretty apocalyptic, but I wouldn't be stunned if that's kind of where this goes in a couple of years. The foundations are shaky, at least, in the least. Okay, number 17, the Cincinnati Bengals. So the Bengals I have ranked 17th. Obviously, they started 7th heading into the year. I did believe in this Bengals team. And in terms of how we got here, was I right? Was I wrong about this Bengals team? I would say I was clearly wrong about the defense and what Lou Anarumo could do to elevate this group. That's the main difference in this Bengals team. But I also don't think they are as bad as a normal 4-7 football team. They have a bunch of tight losses. The week one game, the week one Bengals piss everybody off, obviously, but they lose to the Patriots by 6, week one. Then they lose to Kansas City by 1. They lost to Washington by 5. They've lost 2 games to Baltimore by a combined points of 4, and that includes an overtime loss and a loss where they went for 2 for the win. So to not win one of those hurts. And then they lose this Chargers game where they had it at the end. They miss a couple field goals in that game and drop what would have been a game-ending pick. They just couldn't seal the deal. And then Joe Burrow, who was great all game, just missed a couple throws late that hurt them. So I do think this is a better team than a 4-7 squad, hence why they're ranked 17th and not 25th where the Saints are. But that's not to say that I just have gotten unlucky and that I was right about ranking the Bengals 7th. I mean, they clearly have issues on that side of the ball. And I think what's shown up for the Bengals this year is some concerns about, Lou Anarumo and just the coaching in general. I've never been a Zach Taylor guy, so that really hasn't changed. But obviously these close losses and not having answers at the end of games, the 2-point attempt against Baltimore, perfect example. Lousy-ass play call. But I think coaching overall is an issue for this Bengals team. I would fire Zach Taylor yesterday. I would have fired him 2 years ago. I just don't think he's a good coach. I think he's fine. If he was settling in somewhere as the 28th best offensive coordinator in the league and no one talked about him, I think you could leave him there. But you're the head coach of a Joe Burrow quarterbacked team. I can't get behind that. I just don't think he's creative enough. I don't think he's inspirational enough. I think he's fine. Very Mike McCarthy-esque. But yeah, the fact that the defense and the coaching on that side of the ball and the fact that they're so flat and so uninspiring and uncreative on that side of the ball, like I would think Lou Anarumo could have adjusted. He's always been a guy. His scheme is always flexible where he's able to cater to good talent, but also elevate bad talent. They don't have a creative blitzing scheme. They're not doing wild things with coverages to complement and lift up a secondary that's struggling. They're just kind of playing vanilla and getting beat. And it's not changing. So I don't know that this team makes changes with the staff. I sure as hell would. But to me, that has been the Bengals' downfall, is just they've lost some close games, which is just bad luck, but mostly their coaching is not where it needs to be. And it's a bummer because Joe Burrow has been able to stay healthy, knock on wood, and has been so phenomenal. So fun to watch. Such a reminder of how amazing he is when he plays. But it's not leading to wins. And as far as what matters the rest of the year, I would love to say what matters is that this team can clean up their act and make the playoffs. I don't think it's dead. I don't think that hope is dead. They are 2 games behind Denver. It's doable, and they still play Denver. But this game against the Chargers hurts. I would love to say that that's what matters, but that's just not super realistic. I think it's possible. But for me, what matters is, frankly, kind of like the Bears. I would love to see this team lose enough games that they're able to go get a coach. And is this a team that Ben Johnson would consider? Like, they weren't really in the running to fire Zach Taylor last year, but could that happen this year? Would Ben Johnson be like, yeah, I'll go work with Joe Burrow? Or can you reunite him with Joe Brady? I would love that. I would love that. Joe Brady, who's doing such a good job in Buffalo, and you steal him from the Bills. So I just really, that's a best case scenario for the remainder of the Bengals season, frankly, is just lose out, make the change at coach that I think every Bengals fans deep down know that they're putting themselves behind the 8 ball by having Zach Taylor going up against Andy Reid, and frankly, Sean McDermott's been just so great this year. And now Harbaugh obviously outcoached the Bengals again. They were clearly more prepared, came out better. Forgetting some other guys as well, but there's your 17th ranked Bengals. We're kind of jogging through the rest of the season at this point. Then we got the Rams at 16. They take care of the Patriots this week. So not the biggest win, but they get back to 5-5. They didn't blow it. And this is another team where the ranking of them heading into the year, they ranked 15th heading into the year. They are now 16th. The ranking is damn close to kind of what my expectations were on this team. But how they got here has been a lot different. They've been so injured offensively. So they've been trying to struggle through bad O-lines, weeks without their receivers. Stafford's been battling. He's playing much better now that he's got Cooper and Puka. But what has surprised me about this Rams team that has kept their season alive is the job that Chris Shula is doing with this defense. And it turns out hiring a Shula is a good thing for your football team. But, Yeah, I thought this Rams defense would be bottom of the barrel, maybe the worst in the league. And they're just doing good stuff. I think they're relatively sound in terms of coverage and blitzing and scheme, but they've also just done a great job with this defensive line. Number one, I would say Jared Verse is a legit problem. I mean, I've talked about this, but he's had, and I like that pick, but he has just been more efficient, more powerful, more game-wrecking than I certainly imagined as a rookie. And that has opened everything up. On top of that, they run as many twists and stunts and games as anybody in the league, and they've really leaned into it. They've got these freaky athletes, right? Braden Fisk, Byron Young, Kobe Turner is super quick for a defensive tackle. So these guys are just looping and bending and twisting and pushing, and they're scheming it up super, super well. And that is impressive. It's impressive that the guys are as athletic and as good at what they're doing as they are. But I felt like the loss of the Aaron Donald effect, because you watched the Rams defense last year, they did a lot of the same stuff, but you knew which way opposing offensive lines were going to slide because Aaron Donald was there. And maybe teams are just sliding towards Jared Verse every time now, but I don't think so. I think that the fact that they've been just as good, if not better, scheming up stunts and open rushers and that kind of stuff and causing chaos at the line of scrimmage and stopping the run on the way to doing that is really, really impressive, the job they've done there. So because of the job the D-line is doing, it's making everything feasible for the guys in the back end, and the defense has been solid. They're not a great defense. That'd be virtually impossible with the talent that they have, but they're the 24th best defense in the league. They've had weeks where they've really helped them win, and that's been a surprise. So with that, if the offense can get healthy and get back to the top three offense that I projected them to be coming into the year, then this team could really get serious about winning the division and honestly be an even higher upside football team than I would have painted them coming into the year. Because that's been the offensive struggles, has been the injuries, not necessarily that anybody's playing worse. I don't believe that. So that's exciting if you're a Rams fan, because I think a lot of these reinforcements are on the horizon. And with that, I think if you want to talk about what are the expectations the rest of the year, what constitutes success for the Rams, I think they've had a lot of successes this year in terms of like getting the defense to work. But I do still think winning the NFC West is what constitutes success for this team. They were a playoff team last year. Stafford is 37. And I just think, saying Super Bowl for this team is unrealistic, but I don't think this team is content to just fall to 7-10 and head into the offseason with a bunch of questions, is kind of what I'm saying. I don't think it's the end of the world. You still got McVay. You still have a front office that's finally going to have some picks here and can really start to build the core of this roster up. But again, you got Stafford's 37. Cooper Kupp's still a big piece of what they're doing here. And it would still be nice to get in and, remind people that they're a playoff caliber team. So that would constitute success for this team, I think. But as I do look at the offseason a little bit, I did have one note in terms of something I really want to see them do this offseason. I would love to see them take that second round pick. There's going to be some guys that fall in this draft. I don't know who it's going to be. It could be, I think I said Milton earlier. Is it Milton? The Bama QB. It could be Quinn Ewers. It could be any of these guys. I don't know at this point in time. But I would love to see the Rams take a second round pick in a deep quarterback draft that's not top heavy, or even a late first, and kind of Jordan Love, a young quarterback. Find a guy that they can stash for 3 years and start to develop as the long-term replacement for Stafford. I would love to see this team do that this offseason, regardless of kind of how this season ends. Because Stafford's only going to be here for so long. I think we all know it. He's playing well, but he's 37, and he is a guy that just has been so beat up throughout his career. I don't see him being one of these guys that can play into his 40s, which is pretty much nobody. I mean, it's Tom Brady did it. He was unique. Rodgers is trying to do it. He's been okay, but he's clearly diminished. So that's something I would love to see them do. All right, let's get into the top half now. I guess the Rams were the top half, but we are still in this Schrodinger's box of cats, by the way, because these teams could really go either way. This is the week that we detonate the 49ers. I stuck by this team way too long. I was wrong to do that, clearly. This team has been the team for the last 5 years that earned all the benefit of the doubt, that the second teams doubted them. They would turn around and get right back into Super Bowl contention. They've been to 4 out of 5 NFC championships, 3 out of 5 Super Bowls, something ridiculous like that. It's always been Shanahan, Kittle, recently McCaffrey, Debo, like the defense. Like there's just so much talent, such great coaching, such great culture. I refuse to lower this team out of the Super Bowl tier because I really felt like they were going to get to that spot. And I felt like this week was when that was going to start. Coming off the bye week, I thought they were healthy. Kittle doesn't play in this game against Seattle. And McCaffrey, to me, is clearly pushing it. He looks fine, but he doesn't look like McCaffrey last year. So it's time to lower them and lower them significantly. This is a 10-spot drop for the Niners. I had them 5th last week. People have been telling me for multiple weeks, you're crazy. They got to come down. I said, just give them time. They're going to get there. Like, I would definitely not want to play this team. And I still wouldn't want to play them, but they just do not have that it factor that you hoped they would find. And to me, it really comes down to a lack of explosiveness on offense, I think. Obviously, Ayuk is missed here, but it's not just that because Pearsall's done some stuff. It's Debo has been kind of a non-factor for this team. McCaffrey, as I mentioned, has not been there, and I don't know if you're getting the old McCaffrey back this year. Maybe you do. Kittle's been their most explosive player with some of these catch-and-run plays, but now he's getting banged up, as he tends to do. So you lose that. And the run game's not as good, and you end up really exposing your drop-back passing game where they're just okay. They're not bad, but they're just okay. Brock Purdy is much better on the schemed-up early down stuff than he is in the drop-back passing game. And I like Purdy. I think he reads defenses. I think he makes anticipation throws. I think he extends plays really well. But he's not a tier 1, tier 2 quarterback that is going to thrive in a bunch of drop-back passing situations. So, they need a big throw late in this game to try to put Seattle away. Purdy's trying to hit a deep dig from the pocket, sails it over the guy's head. Margin for error on Purdy's just too small. So, their offensive explosiveness is just not there. They're like an average offense right now. And defensively, I would say they've lived up to their expectations defensively. I think they've been just fine there. I think they're doing exactly what they should be doing there. But heading into the year, the idea was this is going to be an elite offense that doesn't need an elite defense. They need a top 10 defense. And right now, the defense is living up to expectations, but the offense just is not. And I just don't necessarily know what exactly it is. It's been injuries, frankly. And it's been trying to adjust to the reality of where they're at with those injuries, I think is probably the best answer. But, is there something schematically that Shanahan could break out and unlock this thing? Maybe. It tends to go. The second I lower them here, 10 spots, they're going to come out and beat the Packers in Lambeau on Sunday. So, that's usually how it goes with this Niners team. But it's taken too long to get there. Time to lower them in the rankings. And as far as what matters for the rest of the season, they've got to win. This year was supposed to be a dominant Super Bowl season, the last true year of this window. And sometimes you just get unlucky with injuries. But, man, this is not going to look the same into future seasons. A lot of these contracts were structured into 2023, into 2024 to be very helpful. Guys like Kittle and Fred Warner are very cheap this year. They just paid Deommodore Lenoir a massive amount of money. They have to pay Brock Purdy after next season. Ayuk's contract hasn't really kicked in yet. So things are going to get very expensive very quickly. They're going to have to let guys go, and they're going to have to not sign anybody, and they're going to have to start drafting better, frankly, because they have been able to escape some very questionable draft moves. I mean, obviously, you find Brock Purdy in the 7th that render it makes up for the Trey Lance whiff, but they had that 1 year where they took like Cam Latu and Jake Moody, who's been a flop for them. They've drafted 3rd-round kickers that aren't on this team anymore. Like, they've got to get real about their 2nd-round picks. Aaron Banks is a 2nd-round guard, like not a great pick. They got to start drafting better. They also had a 2nd-rounder on Jackson out of USC that's not even played. So that kind of stuff. Like, they are really going to start to feel the lack of young players to step up outside of any position group, really, other than secondary, where they're pretty good. They did find Dominique Pooney this year. That's been big. So it's not all bad with San Fran, but they got to turn it around. That's what matters. The stakes are high for the Niners. That's what it comes down to. All right. One more team. All right, one more time in Schrodinger's box of cats, and that is the Seattle Seahawks, who rank 14th. And they have just a massive, massive win over the 49ers. The defense kind of settles in, starts to look like the Mike McDonald defense that was promised. Been great to see Tariq Woolen get back into the lineup. That's been a big deal for them because Trey Brown was so bad when he was out there. So Brown no longer in, and Woolen's been really good. He has really developed well, which is funny to say because he had that big year where he gets all the picks in his rookie year. He's just been a better, more stable corner since then, even if the picks haven't been there. But yeah, I mean, the secondary is really coming together. Love what Julian Love is doing. Kobe Bryant's been playing safety for them. He's been really good. And they did a really good job keeping everything in front of them and not giving up those big plays against the Niners, slowing down the run. Coming off the bye week, that's a benchmark, landmark type of game for Seattle because most defenses with new coordinators don't just play great right away. Usually takes some time, and there's reason to believe getting healthier with a D-line that has some talent, with a coach like McDonald, like this could really be coming together defensively. So that's exciting. And then, of course, on the offensive side of the ball, they've really unlocked Jackson Smith and Jigba now. I mean, yes, like that's what you want from a first-round wide receiver is an awesome compliment to a guy like DK Metcalf. He's really, I think, quickly establishing that sort of like Kelsey Mahomes, Nico Collins, Stroud chemistry in scramble drill with Geno, where the play breaks down, Geno starts scrambling, which happens a lot because their offensive line sucks. And he's just really smart to find the openings in zone. And he did that at Ohio State too. So it's just great to see him doing that more in the pros. Plus, Seattle has learned how to mix in more of a vertical route tree with him so that he keeps defenses honest, which opens up space underneath for him. But they've learned, all right, double moves where you fake the out and up, that works. He runs those really well. He runs slot fades really well, and he runs corner routes really well. And they're mixing in just enough of those deep targets to get efficient looks from him, but also to keep defenses honest and keep the underneath stuff open. So he has really broken out here. Exactly what you could have dreamed of. You know, Tyler Lockett, I don't think he played in this game. If he did, I don't know if he caught anything. But that was a big thing that Seattle was hoping to emerge this year is that JSN settles in and you can roll forward with him and Metcalf. It looks like that's good to go at this point after a really rough start to JSN's career. So just a huge week for Seattle. No way around it. And they're now a half game behind Arizona. But you look at how they started. I had them 21st coming into the year with some questions, and that I think was a good placement in terms of coming into the year. But it's fun to look back at where they were coming into the year, and now you're seeing some of the growth. A big game like this, beating a Niners team that's been their boogeyman and playing really well when doing so. That's what you want to see when you get a guy like McDonald who was as highly recommended as he was, basically. And I think moving forward, it's a different perspective than teams like the Rams and the Niners, where they're towards the end of their theoretical window, one way or another. See, like, this is the first year of this Seattle window. They got a ton of young talent. They've drafted well. Geno's got a little bit of a longer shelf life than Stafford, I think. But really, like, heading in the right direction with McDonald's defense. That's more of what this season is about for Seattle. I don't think it's a disappointment if they don't win this division. If you're Seattle, I think it's possible for them to do it, but I don't think you're looking back at it like they have to win it for this to be a success. I think what constitutes success for Seattle the rest of the way is they prove that what we saw this week against the Niners defensively is the future of the Seahawks defense, that Mike McDonald really has come in and is going to establish this as a top 10 type of defense for years to come. That was the hope and the potential of this hire. And I think you look at the way they're blitzing, scheming up the pass rush, getting one-on-one rushers to win up front, and getting the secondary to play with this level of communication against a Niners team that really stresses that type of stuff. It's extremely promising. So you want to see that continue. And then I would also say, can Abe Lucas stay on the field at right tackle and look good? Because this right tackle spot has been an utter disaster for Seattle this season. A complete and utter failure. I would love to feel better about that right tackle spot. Otherwise, they're going to have to draft somebody or sign somebody to play right tackle for them. So those are the kind of two main things. And the cherry on top would be, hey, if those things happen, maybe they do win the division. You could say it probably does. So love what happened for Seattle this week, and that's going to round out the box of cats tier for the power rankings. I'm going to take a quick break. Starting to lose my voice a little bit. Knew this was going to be a long episode, but we're getting through it. Going to take a quick break, and then we'll get to our playoff caliber team. Okay, now we are into my playoff caliber teams. Teams that obviously are potent teams that deserve playoff spots, maybe not necessarily Super Bowl contenders. And I might go a little bit faster here. Famous last words, but I do want to get this video out to you guys before week 12 is finished. But yeah, at number 13, I've got the Denver Broncos climbing up a tier. This team just keeps getting better, man. Like, how impressive have the Broncos been? They started 29th in my rankings, 29th. And that was with, like, giving some love to Sean Payton and liking Bo Nix and kind of saying Bo Nix was probably going to have a pretty good rookie season getting to be with Sean Payton. But I just really wasn't buying the defense, frankly. That's been a huge surprise for Denver, is the job Vance Joseph has continued to do there. You remember last year they had that historically bad start, and then very quietly they started winning games with Russell Wilson because that defense was actually pretty good. But I don't know how much we really believed in it because they didn't have much of a pass rush and they were so bad to start the year. Well, they've really built on that. Love what Joseph is doing, running loops and twists and blitzes to get after the quarterback. And you're getting contributions too from, Cooper's having a good year. Zach Allen's been so good. Nick Bonito's come on late. And then the secondary is just underrated, man. They're dominant. They were dominant this week against a good group of Falcons receivers. Drake London and Darnell Mooney are not an easy duo to shut down, and they did. So you got the defense, and then, how can you not like what Sean Payton is doing with this offense and with Bo Nix? And you watch this game against Atlanta, and this is the whole, one-game sample size thing that people freak out about. But if you just changed the colors and made it look like that was Drew Brees on his prime Saints teams, That's what Bo Nix played like in this game against Atlanta. Now, Atlanta's defense is terrible, and they could not rush the passer at all. But Bo Nix goes 28 for 33, 303 yards, 4 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. Just surgical, man. Yes, a lot of schemed up production. And yeah, guess what? When you have Sean Payton as your head coach, you're going to get some screens that go into the end zone. Like, boo-hoo. That's great. it's part of the picture here. But Bo Nix himself, playing on time for a rookie, does not look like a rookie, right? It looks like a veteran quarterback, which was kind of the reason you drafted Bo Nix, was the experience. The dude broke the record for starts in college football. And he's just been impressive in terms of sack avoidance, avoiding negative plays. That's a big part of the position that he's doing so well. And then he's making 2 or 3 really good throws a game. He's not going to, rip a whole shot between zone defenders at, throwing a 70-mile-an-hour fastball with the football. But he can make some big throws. And he's got, I think, an underrated arm to drive the ball 25, 30 yards down the field. So you put all that together, and like I said, Denver's they're getting better. They are having more dominant wins, more impressive wins, and they're climbing up in the rankings, man. I really think a couple weeks ago, I just assumed Denver against some tough opponents. And yeah, they lost to the Chiefs, but on a blocked field goal. They went head-to-head with the Kansas City Chiefs and then came out this week and beat the shit out of Atlanta. This was a dominant win. This is what a playoff caliber team does to a bad football team. And Atlanta, before this week, I viewed as a playoff caliber team. I'm not necessarily so sure anymore, but didn't even mention the offensive line either. Quinn Miners was all over the field. Wins the TFG award for offensive lineman that stood out the most this week. But yeah, I'm just so impressed by the job Sean Payton's doing. There's a lot of good candidates for Coach of the Year this year. Last week, we talked about how Jonathan Gannon should get into that conversation. Obviously, Harbaugh is a great front runner for that award. Dan Quinn in Washington. At this point, what Sean Payton is doing with this Broncos team that had literally no expectations. You draft a quarterback that gets all this hate. The report comes out, you were the only team that had a first-round grade on him. Well, a lot of draft heads did. I know I certainly had him as a first-round caliber quarterback, so I liked the pick. I defended this pick of Bo Nix. I'm proud to say I did. But I didn't really back that up by thinking that this Broncos team was going to win any games this year, obviously ranking them 29th coming into the year. And Bo Nix has been a big part of this whole deal. So just overall, massive week for the Denver Broncos, the direction they're heading in. And just a huge win for ownership, because this group, they traded a first-round pick to go get Sean Payton. That was a bold move. You have to get a franchise-altering coach. That guy can't turn into Doug Peterson if you make that move, Sean Payton, absolutely worth the pick, and has completely overhauled this as a great coach is supposed to do. Payton, before he came to Denver, was viewed as an elite top 4, top 5 coach in the league. Hard to say he's not that again with the job he's doing in Denver right now. So just blown away, man. They keep climbing. I feel like at some point there's going to be a ceiling on this. There's a reason they're not in my Super Bowl caliber team. They need to continue to add talent to this group in the offseason, but man, what a great win for the Broncos. And Broncos fans, I'm happy for you. It's been a rough 8 years or so since Peyton left. And then we're going to stay in the AFC West with the Chargers, who have it's funny to see them right next to the Broncos here, because these two teams, frankly, have a very similar narrative. Teams that we know have talented players on their roster, but a lot of holes as well. And you bring in this kind of legacy, dare I say, Hall of Fame caliber coach with a guy like Harbaugh, at least a football Hall of Fame type of guy in Harbaugh, maybe not NFL Hall of Fame quite yet. But with the job he's doing, maybe in a few years for the Chargers. Let's not get way ahead of ourselves here. But man, Chargers, same deal with the Broncos, except obviously they have Justin Herbert. That's a huge difference. But I had the Chargers ranked 25th, way down there next to the Broncos. And I was not a believer in the year one Chargers. I believed in Harbaugh. I didn't necessarily believe in the Greg Roman hire. I had some pump the brakes on that. But I definitely thought this I'll just cut to the chase. I thought this defense was going to suck. Joey Bosa had not been the same. Khalil Mack was a stud last year, but the secondary was in shambles. They had no linebackers. Their D-line, interior D-line, was a joke. And you're bringing in Minter in his first year. I was just like, surely this is going to take some time, and they're going to need to, fill some holes over a couple of years. And they still can upgrade at spots, but their cornerback depth was solved in the draft, and with Jasir Taylor stepping up in the slot. They found Cam Hart and Jasir Taylor and Tarheeb Still in the, Jasir was there, but Tarheeb Still and Cam Hart have been really good, day 3 rookies. Asante Samuel's hardly played for them, which is crazy because he's their best corner. They go get Elijah Molden to really fill in their third safety spot, which those guys play a lot. They do a lot of 3 safety stuff because they want to use Derwin in a variety of different ways. They go get Denzel Perriman. He's been good. Diane Henley steps up in year 2. They drafted Junior Colson. He's been on and off the field, but they go get Poona Ford to fill the interior D line. And then the good coaching on top of it being just the communication and execution and ability to elevate this defense to what it's been as a top 10 or so unit in year 1. It's just wild. And it's culture, it's physicality, it's preparation and execution. Everything that Harbaugh preaches has been put straight into play immediately. And that's just on the defensive side. Everything that's happening on the offense is super impressive as well. And Herbert, running, just taking flight ever since he's gotten healthy. This is the most excited I've been about Justin Herbert since his rookie year. He's dropping dimes. He's taking care of the football. Really, he was playing hurt and learning the new system, getting familiar with these new wide receivers. It was a rocky start. It really was. He was not playing well in the first 5 weeks. That Cardinals game, something turned on, and he has been so good. Lamar, but he's been up there. There's a lot of QBs playing at a high level right now, but I would say the last 6 weeks, 4 weeks, he's been in consideration for the best quarterback in the league. And in this game against the Bengals, really, really no different. He had a couple moments, but it's one of those deals where he was the reason they won the game, and then for about a 6-minute stretch or about a quarter stretch was also a contributor to them almost blowing the game because he fumbled the ball trying to scramble, and then very easily could have thrown a game-losing interception that was dropped. But it doesn't take away from the 8 to 12 incredible plays that he made. So, he's the core of it. And then I've been impressed by the rookie wide receivers. I'm not really surprised that Ladd is playing as well as he is. I had him as my wide receiver 5. I was like, I don't care that he's a white slot wide receiver. He's going to be one of the 5 best receivers in this draft, and I'm really happy I did that, putting him over some guys like Adonai Mitchell and Keon Coleman. Not that I didn't like those guys either, but I felt like Ladd was special. And the way he's running routes, the connection he's establishing with Herbert, this could be a dominant wide receiver quarterback connection, one of those elite combos. And then Quentin Johnston stepping up, another guy I've always believed in, but great to see him, playing cool and calm and catching the football when he's open, getting open as well. So, that's been nice that the playmakers are starting to settle in, the young playmakers that they've invested in. And Greg Roman's not holding them back. I don't know that, they've had some plays where they've schemed guys open. They got some coverage busts against Cleveland. They've done some stuff schematically, but it's more just they have a real passing game. Greg Roman's not coming out there trying to force 3 tight ends on the field and having 4 guys stop at the line of scrimmage and not run routes. I've been impressed in the sense that they actually have good passing designs, good enough for Herbert to execute. I'm not going to give Roman a ton of praise necessarily. I think the run game stuff's been really good, and they're starting to use Herbert more in the run game too. But that was a worry I had was I think Herbert's great, but in a Greg Roman designed passing game with a bunch of young wide receivers, how's this really going to look? And it's been beautiful. So that's how it's going versus how it started. I certainly didn't think this would all come together like this in year one. Now, kind of like the Broncos, I still think they have holes that have shown up as issues in spots throughout the year. And when it comes to having a full force of wide receivers, and, I like how the young corners are playing, but, I see, not to hate on Cam Hart, I think he's doing a great job, but watching that Bengals game, he's a grabby guy. He's a very grabby guy. I'm not fully sure, when we get to the playoffs, he's going to be having great games against these great passing games because, they didn't play great defensively against the Bengals offense. So, there are still some holes. I think every Chargers fan would tell you that. But I think every Chargers fan would also tell you, this has been an absolute best-case scenario. When they got Harbaugh, people were excited. This is what you dreamed of, was an instant turnaround like this, and it's just glorious, man. I'm super stoked for the Chargers. I'm sorry I doubted that they'd get there this early. I'm sorry I ranked you 25. I'm sorry that I've been a little bit lower on Herbert over the last few years. So Chargers fans, I hope you'll take me back, but the OGs do remember me being the guy that was always too high in the Chargers as well. There's definitely that version of me too. So I'm stoked for the Chargers. And, this is a type of team that I think could win a playoff game. I don't know if they could string together enough, 4 straight wins and go on a run necessarily. If Herbert's playing like this, it's theoretically possible, but definitely in terms of what's going to be a success for the Chargers, it's almost get into the playoffs. Don't blow this at the end of the year, which seems like that's not going to happen with this version of this team that's just so mentally tough. It's hard to say anything else could constitute a success for this Chargers team because this year has already been a smashing success. I don't think the point is to now turn around and expect Super Bowl in year one with Harbaugh. I think that's still unrealistic, but genuinely, what else could you have asked for if you're a Chargers fan? We didn't even mention the offensive line. That's been sweet. But then at number 11, we have another kind of overachieving team, though this was a team I was higher on, and that was the Arizona Cardinals. And I had them 22 coming into the year, which doesn't sound crazy, but I'm proud of that. I think most of the preseason power rankings had the Cardinals bottom 3 to 5, especially given the public narrative on Kyler Murray before this season. And I'm proud to say, I had this as a team that was setting up to be a top 10 offense with a quarterback that was going to surprise a lot of people, that was going to be kind of a dark horse MVP in the sense of probably not actually going to win MVP, but if you voted for 5 MVPs, he'd probably receive a lot of 3rd, 4th, 5th place votes, that kind of deal. I think that's how Kyler's playing right now. I think he's had too many bad games earlier in the year as they were still figuring some stuff out. And he's had some games too where he actually hasn't had to do much because there are other aspects of this offense that are really good. Play calling and the run game especially are just awesome. So I'm proud to say that I essentially was on top of it in terms of this being a sneaky good team and this offense being really good. But in terms of how we go from, okay, they're a team that ranks low 20s that nobody really wants to play to okay, they rank 11th and they're in first place in the NFC West. How we got there is the defense, where I definitely thought this defense was going to continue to stink, especially after their first round pick, Robinson, has not played yet. B.J. Ojolari went down for the year. I thought they were going to stink before that, but man, I thought Gannon still had a lot to prove. The D-line's a joke. The secondary completely unproven. Really no linebackers to get overly excited about. And I was just this team's going to have to win every game 30-27. And that's not been the case. Jonathan Gannon has actually done a remarkable job with this defense. And I guess I didn't anticipate that. I don't think anybody did. I think he's doing a really good job scheming up the pass rush with blitzes and stunts, and he's doing a good job to like confuse quarterbacks too, because he'll take a slot corner and drop him into single high or drop him into two high. He really does a good job with those kind of Fangio principles of mixing and matching coverages to keep quarterbacks confused. So the scheme is really elevating the defense, and he just has these guys flying around. I would credit Budda Baker a lot too. I think his play style is obviously an impact because he is one of the best run and chase, secure tackling safeties in the league. He's a blur coming down to the ball carriers, but he's obviously a great leader, and I think he's inspired a lot of these guys to play like he does, and you could feel it. This team doesn't generate this incredible pass rush. They're not the stickiest players in coverage, but they play top down. They make you earn every yard, and they tackle really well. So Gannon has just done a really good job at that defense. Shout out, lastly, to Garrett Williams. Looks like a phenomenal pick. Someone that I've talked about before, but I'll re-up if you're not familiar with who Garrett Williams is. He very likely would have been a top 40 pick or so in 2 drafts ago. Really good tape at Syracuse, playmaking corner, good athlete, but injured himself, I think at like maybe like pre-draft or bowl game or something. So he missed the whole draft process. It wasn't able to work out, which is a big deal for secondary members. Didn't get to go to the Senior Bowl, all that stuff. So he ends up falling into the mid-third. But they stole him, knowing they didn't need him right away. And he's out there. He's actually starting in the slot, which is not what I expected because he was an outside corner at Syracuse. But he's been awesome. He has disrupted so many plays to force teams into passing situations. Breaking up bubble screens and speed outs and stopping the run, where Gannon, again, has been really good scheming up blitzes and stuff. So just so impressed. And I'm excited to see moving forward as we talk, now about like what constitutes success the rest of the way. 9-8, and if that wins the division, that's great. I don't think you have to get crazy about this Cardinals team. They are still one of the least talented defenses in the league. Offensively, they're pretty well set up. Let's not sugarcoat it there. But, I think down the stretch, keep seeing the defense play well. I'm excited to see Darius Robinson, their first-round pick, get back into the mix. I think they got exciting plans for him. I think he's a good player. I compared him to Leonard Williams, so if he's Leonard Williams and you kind of drop that piece into this D-line with Baron Browning there, hopefully playing a little bit more moving forward, get a little bit more one-on-one stuff from the pass rush, continue to see the secondary play well, and offense, offensively you don't want to see them take hiccup weeks as they've had, but I would say if the Cardinals get to 9-8, and they keep doing what they're doing, that's a success. If that means they go to the playoffs, that's great. But that would be like a cherry on top of what's been a very successful season already for the Cardinals. Okay, into the top 10. I have the Houston Texans ranked number 10. Not really budging too much here. They do get a +1 in the power rankings because San Fran dropped so much. But I'm still not overly impressed by Houston. And, I ranked them number 10 coming into the year. And that was kind of lower than a lot of people had them. A lot of people said I was too low on Stroud. I kind of had a gut feeling that this team jumped the gun a little bit. I saw over the summer especially a lot of Super Bowl picks on Houston, saying this is a 13, 14 win team, like just going crazy with the Texans. And look, I'm an idiot too. I picked the Jets to go to the Super Bowl, so I get it. But I'm just saying, when it comes to Houston, I had a little bit of pump the brakes on them. I think I had them as like an 11-win team that I can't remember if I had them winning in the first round of the playoffs or losing in the second round or what, but something that probably would have constituted a little bit of a disappointment for a team that kind of went for the Super Bowl, but still a good team. And that's kind of where Houston's at right now. They're 7-4. They're in good shape in terms of winning the AFC South. You figured that was probably not going to be too much contest on that one. So they're doing just fine in terms of that, but they have regressed in a lot of areas. I especially offensively, like they can't protect. Last year, even if they didn't have the roster talent, Bobby Slowick was doing a lot of good stuff schematically. to buy time for Stroud to have the efficient year that he had. This year, they're not really doing much, schematically speaking, in the passing game that gets you excited. It's all just kind of Stroud having to be superhero. And a lot of times he's done that. And frankly, even if the Texans offense is struggling, I think my opinion on Stroud has ascended this year because I don't look at this and say that's a good. It's funny how this stuff works. Heading into last year, you thought it was a garbage surrounding cast. You watch the film and it's like, well, Stroud's playing great, but also he's got time to throw, and they're getting these wide receivers wide ass open down the field. This year, it's not really the case. I mean, it's been a lot of drop back passing, quick throws from Stroud, quick reads, relying on anticipation and relying on playmaking. And it's him being a superhero. I think he's playing quarterback at a higher level this year than he did in his rookie year, which is, I mean, that's not a surprise. I mean, he's in year 2. Even if you looked at this on paper and thought this was going to be a better surrounding cast than it was last year. So I don't know if that made sense, but it definitely, the weaknesses on this offensive line that always existed on the roster are not being sheltered by the scheme as much. And you're left with a very boom or bust offense. The main difference is like Joe Mixon has been an absolute monster. That I did not see coming. But anyway, I think defensively as well, they've been really good the last 2 weeks as we start to kind of transition to, where the rest of the season is going and what constitutes success. I think what they've done on defense the last 2 weeks is really encouraging. The guys in the secondary have just been making plays. I mean, the picks they had against the Lions were amazing. And then like Jalen Petrie coming in to punch that ball out for the defensive touchdown against Dallas. Like, these guys are starting to play with a lot of confidence. And even if they have some coverage busts and give up some big plays, I mean, if they're able to if you get a big play, touchdown allowed, it can easily be counteracted by making a great play on the ball or punching a ball out. Like, they feel like a defense kind of playing with that sort of championship energy a little bit more the last couple of weeks. Danielle Hunter has been a beast. So, like, to me, keep the defense going. Feel like this could maybe be turning into an elite defense, whether that's this year or next year. For me, I don't think this team needs to win the Super Bowl this year to constitute a successful season. I think if they get in, are competitive in the playoffs in a tough AFC, that's fine for me. You didn't necessarily disappoint. You didn't regress all the way back to a 4 or 5 win team, as we see sometimes from teams like the Texans that kind of come out of nowhere. And I think that's a positive takeaway. It's hard not to do that in this league. So I don't know. I think they're still in a pretty good spot. Like, looking forward, Stroud's awesome. Nico Collins is awesome. I still think I still think the coaching structure is what they want. I think the front office structure is what they want. Slowick's got a lot to prove, though. I would say that's maybe the other thing that you want to see is some better stuff from Bobby Slowick, scheming up protection, getting guys open. So I don't know. That's just my perspective on the Texans. I'm curious if Texans fans are like disappointed. Like, disappointment always comes from expectations. So I'm curious if people are looking at this Texans team, being a team that's maybe not a Super Bowl team right now, as a disappointment, or are you more like me and you're like, it's not a huge surprise that they're discovering some parts of this team that still need to get weeded out and worked on. But yeah, let me know in the comments. Let's go to my number 9 team, the Washington Commanders. This is, I mean, look, Sean Payton overachieving, not the biggest surprise. Sean Payton's a great coach. We knew that. Impressive and a surprise, but not one of the biggest surprises I've ever seen. Same deal with Harbaugh and the Chargers. Kyler Murray and the Cardinals. I love Kyler. Not a huge surprise to see them having the success they're having. The Washington Commanders, number 9, 7-4 with some of the games they've played this year. Yeah, no. I did not see that coming. I didn't see in a best case scenario for Washington. I did not see this happening. I had this team dead last coming into the year before I lowered the Patriots below them after all those moves. But yeah, no, I this completely caught me by surprise. I was just wrong, like so wrong about a lot of like pretty much everything on this team. I think there was a couple spots I was right about. Like I liked the Cliff Kingsbury hire a lot. I was critical of the Dan Quinn hire because I didn't really like following up one retread defensive head coach with another. I know a lot of Commanders fans that were like, yeah, I don't like it. But when they did get Cliff, I was like, I kind of like that because I do think Dan Quinn is a good defensive coach. I think he's an inspirational locker room guy. My worry was, are you going to be able to get an offensive, support staff for your Jaden Daniels? And then they got Cliff, and I was like, well, I guess they got Cliff before Jaden Daniels, but same idea. Like, were you going to have a surrounding infrastructure of offensive staff for a young quarterback? I assumed it was going to be Drake May for a long time. But either way, I like Cliff as a play caller. I do. It's just when you give him roster control and he wants to build a Big 12 team with all speed receivers, you kind of turn into a soft football team. But Cliff always did really good stuff in the run game and had some pretty good offenses down there in Arizona. Just that team had issues in other areas. And no one's going to hire Cliff as a head coach, right? Because of all the things we just said. He's just not a head coach type of dude. So I was at least right in defending the Cliff Kingsbury hire, where a lot of people were critical of that. But beyond that, I would say I was wrong about everything about the Commanders. Like, I'm trying to think, like Luke McCaffrey, I wasn't too fond of that pick. I would say that's not really worked out for them so far. But yeah, Jaden Daniels, absolutely worth the number 2 overall pick. Even if Drake May looks good, I think there's no regrets. Like, they clearly were onto something. Like, that dude is special. He is a gamer. Jaden Daniels. Like, he doesn't make mistakes. He's been so confident. The second he does make a mistake, he bounces right back. His pocket presence, like the game does not move too fast for him. He's been accurate. I'm not going to say he's been like unbelievably accurate. There's been some missed throws in there. Made throws on the run. Like, what's not to love about Jaden Daniels? He has absolutely elevated this entire situation. I would say Jaden Daniels is number 1 reason the Commanders have had so much success. But, the offensive line has been really good. That was another thing I was terrified of, was like, you looked at this thing on paper and it was like, I mean, you got some Band-Aids there, but this could be a really tough unit. And it's been a really good O-line. I do think Jaden Daniels is a big reason for that because he manages the pocket well. He gets rid of the ball quickly, and teams have to contain rush against him. And they have a really good play-action game. So they're doing a lot of stuff to help the offensive line. But the guys have stepped up and played well there too. Not necessarily last week against Philadelphia, but that's been sweet. And then, defensively, they haven't been great. It'd be damn impossible for them to be great with this roster talent. But they've had some good moments in the last couple of months. Dan Quinn's figured some stuff out, I would say. And I know they've cooled off a little bit. We're not talking about the Week 6 Commanders anymore. They've changed. They're the Week 12 Commanders, and I think they've definitely revealed that they still have a lot of work to do, right? That's not a surprise. Like I said, this was just an unfathomable best-case scenario for the Commanders, given that we knew they had so many holes. I do think this is about their ceiling for the year. As we saw against the Eagles, which are going to come in very high on this list, they just can't out-talent teams right now. But the quarterbacking, the coaching, and the culture has been transcendent above the roster talent for the vast majority of the season. And I'm on board, man. I love to see it. Like, I'm happy to be wrong about a team that has been through the ringer. And I've run out of things to say, man. We've talked about them a lot this year, but with all that said, like, what constitutes success moving forward, I do think they've set a bar high enough that they need to get into the playoffs to consider this season a success. If they had all the hype they had earlier in this year and they kind of struggle down the stretch and, can't finish this and, they would have to fall. They're a game and a half up. So they'd have to fall down to like 9-8 and finish the season 2-4. Like that would certainly be a disappointment for the Commanders. So I do think they have to get into the playoffs, but anything more than that, I think is just unreasonable. And then they just got to go have a good offseason, keep patching these holes, draft well, all that. And the Commanders are going to be sitting pretty. I think this thing is, it's very 2023 Houston Texans-esque is what we're seeing with Washington. Then at number 8, the Green Bay Packers, who started at number 12, now come in at number 8. Man, I don't know that my thoughts on the Packers have really changed too much here based on where I had them coming into the year. A lot of people thought 12 was too low, actually, for the Packers. And just like internally, how I view the Packers, I feel like the bar has stayed the same, and then teams have just moved up and down around them accordingly. And this week they happen to settle in at number 8. But especially if you told me Love was going to get hurt week 1, it was going to look like a season ender. He was going to miss 3 weeks, and then, you would have to kind of stumble your way towards the bye week with him playing hurt. I would especially said, yeah, 7-3 is a pretty damn good start for the Packers. So anyway, they beat the Bears this week, coming off the bye week. And I wouldn't say it was the clean, convincing win that you might have hoped from Green Bay coming out of the bye against a stumbling Bears team. This is a team that I've talked about this narrative where, what do you make of the first half of the Packers with that Love injury and the new defensive scheme and a lot of just volatility with Green Bay really in the first half of the year. So you thought, okay, maybe they can come out, get this thing rolling, come out and kill the Bears, bury them. Not really the case. They escape with a win on a blocked field goal. That said, I do think it's a good win for Green Bay because I do think Chicago found offensive competency, which we've at points in the season ranked the Bears in the top half of the league as a playoff contender. I think they were closer to that last week after the coordinator change. A good defense on the road against a hated divisional rival with the Bears playing with their season on the line. I don't think Green Bay looked bad either, but again, this is a team that kind of had some Super Bowl hopes this year. They have not emerged as like a tier 1 Super Bowl team, which I think was the upside coming in. And frankly, given their weird start to the season, that's still maybe in there. We'll see what they do against the Niners this week. But they definitely haven't hit their stride quite yet. Now, you do have to remember, this is what happened to the Packers last year. And not even this good. Like, they were a bad team. I think I had them as low as like 27 at one point in the power rankings last year. They were down bad. Like, Love was looking like a flop. And then the second half of the year, they were one of the best teams in football. And they played the Niners tough in San Fran in a rain game that almost went to the NFC Championship. So, like, this team still, I feel like, is trying to teach us who they are. But, they had some big questions coming into the year that remain questions. Jordan Love being the biggest of which. He has the big polarizing 1 year, gets the big contract. And unfortunately, I think he's left us with just as many questions. Maybe not more, but just as many. I think the injury is a big part of that. Missed a lot of time, played hurt, had some ugly moments. But he's just an incredibly polarizing quarterback right now. And polarizing is the key word there because I think a lot of people would say he's just been bad this year because he's had some ugly plays, right? Every week, essentially, there's been an ugly Jordan Love play or two, or maybe a game or two. He's had 3 ugly mistakes. But teams, he's made some ugly mistakes and teams have made him pay for it essentially every time. his turnover worthy play to like actual turnovers is pretty close to 100%, I believe. I'm just pulling this up on the fly here. So Jordan Love has 11 turnover worthy plays on the season, and he has 11 interceptions. Compare that to Dak Prescott has 16 turnover worthy plays, 8 interceptions. Sam Darnold, 15 turnover worthy plays, 10 interceptions. Baker Mayfield, 15 to 9. Hurts, 14 turnover worthy plays to 5 interceptions. You get the point? Like, teams are capitalizing on Jordan Love's mistakes, and typically because they are really bad turnover worthy plays, where his accuracy shows up as an issue on like 2 throws a game, where he'll just sail a ball. Sometimes it's like sails a crossing route and it's just right in the safety's lap, or he's chucking the ball straight to a defender because he didn't see him. So people are focusing on that a lot, but he's also making some really incredible plays too. The pocket presence, especially this week against the Bears, showed just how good it is. The play extension, the way that he can kind of sense a blitz and drift and buy enough time and know where the ball needs to go. I do think if it's not one of the 2 plays a game where he's forcing a read or not seeing it, he actually shows really high processing and decision making and understanding of the scheme generally. So just the roller coaster of Jordan Love has made this season kind of tough to zero in on, especially when the defense, frankly, has also been a roller coaster. I would say it's been generally positive for the Packers defense. They aren't having these 34-point shit shows that they used to have under Joe Barry, where they just thought the defense couldn't get off the field, and they're giving up these long 12-play touchdown drives all day long, playing cover 4 off zone on 3rd and 3. That's been gone. But they are probably, I would have to look at the numbers, but I would imagine they're giving up more explosive plays. They're playing more aggressive. They're blitzing more. And it's generally led to good results. But there has been some porous aspects of this defense. And there's some talent deficiencies on this defense. They don't have any corners right now. Jair Alexander hasn't been able to get healthy from the leg injury that he suffered at the end of the Jags game, I think. But he hasn't been. He was basically not playing against the Bears. He would come in for some 3rd downs, and beyond him, like, I just can't believe the Packers didn't address cornerback. Like, what are you doing? Like, you could look at that roster this offseason. You had to add somebody, and they didn't. So that's kind of unbelievable. But they have cornerback issues, and their linebacker situation. I mean, you kind of knew it coming into the year, right? I think I had him ranked as the 30th linebacker room in the league. It's like, okay, you got Quay, who's been terrible, a first-round pick, who's an athlete. You hope he develops, but there's no guarantee. And then you got Edgerrin Cooper, who you're excited about, but he's a rookie, and he's going to make some mistakes, probably going to rotate a little bit. And, yeah, they are not consistent from the 2nd and 3rd levels of the defense in terms of gap discipline, tackling consistency, coverage assignments. So they have some really good moments. And that's really before we even mention that this pass rush has not been what you would think on paper. Their pass rush has mostly come from Jeff Hafley designing really nice blitzes. They don't blitz a ton, which is kind of frustrating. They're like 6th lowest in blitz rate. But they're super efficient when they do blitz. So that's kind of frustrating because they keep trying to win with 4 to help out their coverage unit. And it's not really happening. I will say, in this Bears game, Rashawn Gary finally woke up, and they were using him in a 2-point stance more, which is interesting because coming into the year, I would have said, great, get him in a 3-point stance, use the size, convert speed to power, get your hand in the dirt and get after it. I think he's actually just more comfortable rushing from a 2-point stance, and he kind of took over the Bears game at the very end. So that's an encouraging. That's the most we've seen from Rashawn Gary all season long. So hopefully that can, wake the pass rush up a little bit. But, you got all the first-round players up front. They're trusting them to win, and they're not winning. So, again, the defense has had good moments, and they've had some disappointing aspects of the team too. It all has just combined to a young team that's a good team, an incredibly well-coached team with a lot of talented players that's still trying to learn how to consistently play complementary football to avoid mistakes, which that Lions game was full of them, especially. It was just night and day compared to the best team in football in terms of the mental toughness of the team. But I think they're still in a pretty good spot in terms of where they started and how it's going. I'd say it's pretty damn similar. You're still excited about this team, but they haven't quite met that hype yet. And as you look down the stretch for this team, what constitutes success? I still think winning a playoff game should be the expectations for Green Bay. Like I said, they're a good team, but I don't think they've emerged as a Super Bowl team quite yet. The main thing for me is, can Love lock in like he did last year and then not look back? That would be the dream for a Packers fan, because he did in the first half of last year make a lot of mistakes, clean it up. Anyway, Green Bay remains a fairly challenging team to analyze. Let's stick in the NFC North and talk about the Minnesota Vikings. And this has just been such a pleasant surprise too. I mean, I don't even know if the most optimistic Vikings fans would have said 8-2 was possible. What's funny is you're 8-2 and you're a wild card team because Detroit is that good. But look, I like the Vikings coming in. I had them ranked 20th, which of course, I had a couple of Vikings fans say that was too low. But for the most part, the average ranking on the Vikings was like 24th, 25th. And I also said, like, Sam Darnold's going to be pretty good for this team. I had that video would have been back in July, and I said one of my hot takes was Darnold was going to play well enough to hold on to the starting job and then get a Baker Mayfield-esque contract, probably somewhere else, but maybe in Minnesota. And obviously J.J. McCarthy gets hurt, and that changes that a little bit. But if Darnold was playing the way he's been playing, I don't think he ever would have lost this job. So I would say my Vikings takes have held up. But as far as from their perspective, what has changed for them to make them the 7th best team in football? I think the biggest question heading into the year for the Vikings was, could Brian Flores recreate the magic that had this defense as a top 10 defense in the first half of last year? Whereas in the second half of last year, they were a poor defense. Teams caught up with the scheme, and their talent base was brought to the forefront, and the defense struggled. And you kind of figured that sort of min-maxed approach of Brian Flores last year, where he was basically either rushing 3 or 8, or 3 or 7 was usually the math, showing blitz all the time, but then either running a zero blitz or disguising the blitz and dropping a bunch of guys into coverage. Teams figured that out. But this year he's taken a similar approach where he's going to show everybody at the line of scrimmage where you have no idea who's coming. But it's been a lot more 4 and 5 man rushes, which are just more sustainable over time. It allows you to be obviously more gap disciplined with your zone coverages. But he's leveraged the threat of those blitzes into the ability to run twists, run blitzes, drop an edge rusher into coverage where he's brought in an Andrew Van Ginkel, who's the perfect player for his system, maybe the best zone defending edge defender in the league. But creating those numbers advantages, creating phantom pressures where teams are sliding in the wrong direction. You got an unblocked corner coming in, from a 4-man rush. Like, that is the best thing you can do, is if you use the threat of the blitz to manufacture a free rusher on a 4-man rush, you're basically requiring that the quarterback make the perfect throw or make the guy miss or make a play out of structure to beat that. And that's just, Flores is able to do that consistently. Not to mention, this has been the number 1 run defense in the NFL. And that's incredible as well. I mean, really the only true defensive tackle that they have is Harrison. Harrison Phillips is like the one true defensive tackle they have. They have a bunch of like hybrid end types that are like 290, 285 pounds. Guys like Jalen Redmond and Jonathan Bullard. Those guys are playing well. And then Blake Cashman has been such an amazing addition. He is just a man on fire. He is, quite frankly, a top 5 linebacker in the NFL. He's just remarkable. Obviously, Van Ginkel and Grenard stopping the run too. The support they get from Metellus and the 3 safety packages they run. Von Pace has been a factor. But the fact that they stop the run and then have had that scheme with the designed rushes and stuff, it's unbelievable. Brian Flores is the best coaching asset, assistant coaching asset in the league by far. Like, how many first-round picks would you trade to guarantee you get Brian Flores as your defensive coordinator for the next 5 years? 2? Like, that's the type of asset he is for the Vikings. And then the other question was going to be the quarterback play. And Sam Darnold bounced back last week against Tennessee. No turnovers. There's a couple really key moments late in that game where they're winning, and he's about to get sacked in previous weeks, in previous seasons, certainly. Sam Darnold, kind of some hero ball moments. You just go back a week ago against Jacksonville, forcing turnovers down in the red zone. Sam Darnold kind of learning from those mistakes, eating the ball, punting the ball away, living to see another day, trusting the defense. Kind of a good learning week for Sam Darnold against Tennessee. But, kind of very Jordan Love-esque where, yes, you can accentuate the turnovers and knock him for the negative plays, but 9 out of 10 plays, he shows really good processing, an incredible arm to make really good throws, and just great pocket presence to extend plays as well. Like, those two guys are actually, it's actually pretty crazy because my pro comp on Jordan Love was Sam Darnold in the sense of, like, he's a really high upside, low floor quarterback prospect that needs to be developed the right way. It's actually, I just thought of that was my pro comp on Jordan Love. And I know it's going to sound like I didn't like Jordan Love when I did that, but that's who he is as a prospect, was Sam Darnold, who went number 2 overall, was kind of, the point. But anyway, it's funny to see these two guys together playing football at a pretty similar level this year in the same division. But yeah, they've answered those 2 questions. And with that, I mean, obviously O'Connell and Justin Jefferson and all that stuff is, we knew that was going to be great. But those have been the 2 main differences and questions that the Vikings have answered. So what matters moving forward for the Vikings? To me, I think this season has already constituted success. They get in, win 11, 12 games, get in as a wild card. I think they're capable of winning a playoff game, but they're not quite like the Packers where you had expectations to do that coming into the year. I think if you're the Vikings and you lose a tough game to the Eagles or whoever they end up playing in the first round of the playoffs, obviously you want to win that game, but I don't think you look back on the season if that happens and say that was disappointing. I think just getting into the playoffs from this point moving forward is a success for the Vikings. And then for me, through the offseason, success to me is retaining Brian Flores, which he has an ongoing lawsuit against the NFL for unfair hiring practices. If the NFL is blacklisting him as long as he has that lawsuit going, I mean, what a luxury for the Vikings. Besides whatever you think about the lawsuit and how much it might suck for Flores or whatever, like, all that aside, what a luxury for the Vikings that you have a guy that is a no-brainer, like, top 10 coach in the league. I thought he was in Miami, a top 10 coach that struggled to get the offense right with Tua. But you have that as your defensive coach. Are you fucking kidding me? That is such a luxury. So that, to me, is the number one priority for the Vikings, is keep the defense put. And then, you can figure out that, it's probably going to be J.J. McCarthy, I think. But that, to me, is into the offseason the biggest thing that matters for the Vikings. All right. But the last team here in this tier is the Pittsburgh Steelers, who started 18th for me. They've been 18th. They've fluctuated from about 12 to 18 for about 5 years. Really, since Big Ben was good. This is the first time. I mean, massive win against Baltimore. And that, to me, cements that this is a different Steelers team. This is not the 10-7 7, 9-8, 10-6 wild card frisky team that's been the Steelers for 5 fucking years. And yeah, 5 fucking years, Steelers fans. I've had nothing to say about you guys. Same old, same old. Great defense, mediocre offense. Mike Tomlin is fucking amazing. That's been the Steelers for 5 years. Finally, we got something else to say about this team. Now, this does all center around the fact that, yeah, this defense is amazing. And they were the reason they beat the Ravens, was the defense. I mean, the fact that, they've been so great, but you got Highsmith goes down last week for a few weeks. Oh, yeah, the league let you get Nick Herbig, who has 4 big pressures in this game, forces the fumble that was a huge difference in this game, early in this game, in your own territory, or in Steelers territory. Just big time forced fumble. So he's good. And then these linebackers as well. We talk so much about Russell Wilson being a different level of quarterback for this team. The defense is also more complete because they have linebackers right now. They haven't had linebackers like this since Ryan Shazier got hurt, dude. Patrick Queen had his struggles early, but he is really settling in as a number 1 linebacker. He has reached a comfort level within this defense. They're really letting him fly around and be himself. And then, dude, I don't have words to describe how sexy the other 2 linebackers are as a duo. Like, the idea of perfectly rotating a Landon Roberts, who's literally one of the best run-defending linebackers in the league, who can't cover for shit, and a rookie in Peyton Wilson, who had incredible coverage feel, incredible athleticism, incredible playmaking ability, but can't defend the run because he's slender and played a lot of edge in college, and shouldn't be playing a lot because he just gets hurt all the time, so only playing him on third downs. The idea that the Steelers are smart enough to just get those 2 guys on the cheap and just combine them to this super player, it's like, okay, this is going to date me and make me seem like a super nerd. But it's like the Gate Guardian in Yu-Gi-Oh, where the individual pieces are fine, but you combine that MFer, like you got a god out there. And that's what they're doing with Landon Roberts and Peyton Wilson, is they just are playing them situationally. And I wonder if the league is taking note, because this idea of linebacker by committee is starting to spread a little bit more. And it's just working so perfectly for the Steelers. Like, Peyton Wilson had a pass breakup against the Ravens on Justice Hill that was just game-changing. And Landon Roberts is not making that play. He's not recovering to make that play. He's just not. So the defense is special. The special teams are special. I mean, the fact that Chris Boswell was the better kicker than Justin Tucker in this game was huge. But then, of course, you have everything we've talked about with the Steelers, Russell Wilson being the perfect fit, the moon balls with Pickens, Arthur Smith, another offensive coordinator that I defended. I think Arthur Smith as an offensive coordinator is about as good as you're going to do in terms of finding a guy on the street to be hired as your offensive coordinator as opposed to your head coach. So that's all working. The run game's really good. And their offensive line, frankly, hasn't really all come together yet in a way that I think they're capable of. So, yeah, this team is a legitimate playoff caliber team in a way that I have not said in years past. They've been worthy of sneaking into the playoffs in years past. But this is like, no, they should beat a round 1 playoff team and are the type of team that, like, if things get lucky for them, they could go find themselves in the Super Bowl at the end of it. I don't think that's crazy. And that's a transition to what matters for the Steelers team, what constitutes success for this team. I think winning a playoff game is a success for the Steelers. But I also don't think it's crazy to say, like, they're reaching a point that if I were a Steelers fan, I frankly might get a little disappointed if they don't go on, like, a deep playoff run. Like, they're at the top of this tier for a reason. Like, they are a really legitimate football team because they just I don't need to get back into it. I just went through the whole deal, but they have a complete team with a real offense, an elite defense, and special teams. So, very impressed by the Steelers. I obviously had them too low coming into the year at 18. But let's get into the top 5. These are my Super Bowl contenders. And I'm going to skip the what matters most segment on these teams, because once you're in this tier, it's Super Bowl or bust. What matters most for these 5 remaining teams is get the damn thing done. Go win the Super Bowl, okay? And for the Steelers, for the Chiefs, who come in at number 5 this week, dropping 3 spots in the rankings was just kind of waiting on them to lose so I could do this, because they are still the Chiefs, but they're just not as potent as these other 4 teams. And we saw that against Buffalo. We've seen that all year. You flip 4 plays, and this is a 7-4 football team. But this team can still absolutely win the Super Bowl, right? They're incredible defensively, and you still got Mahomes. Mahomes will make plays. I do think it's actually a big deal that Isaiah Pacheco is going to come back, because the best thing this team has is the interior trio. Kareem Hunt's been a fine acquisition, but there's no explosiveness there. But there's potential for explosiveness that this team desperately needs, because Xavier Worthy's not consistent enough to get it. He had another big drop in this game, made some plays as well. They just picked up Tyquan Thornton. They're desperately searching for somebody to create explosives here. Mahomes has missed throws deep as well. It's not just the receivers. And their tackles have a hard time buying time to push the ball deep. So, if they get a few extra 20, 30-yard runs from Pacheco, which he's an explosive back to do that, it'd be a difference maker for them. So I think it's a big deal to get him back. But yeah, their margin for error is just very slim, because they're a defensive football team that counts on Mahomes making plays on third down and the run game. So if you go against a team like Buffalo, that's a powerhouse offense with a good defense, that's going to have a good game plan to take Kelsey away, it's going to be tough. And that's what we saw for the Chiefs. They didn't get killed. They didn't get blown out. Josh Allen has the big run at the end to put this game away with 2-3 minutes left or whatever. But they're right in the mix, but they can't keep winning every one-score game simply for the fact that they have Patrick Mahomes, especially when Mahomes isn't even playing like the best quarterback in football right now. So, as far as, I had them ranked number 1 coming into the year. They're ranked number 5 right now. They've had injuries, right? Rashee Rice and Hollywood Brown were key aspects of my excitement for this team to be a more explosive offense. I wasn't super high on Worthy being a year 1 impact. I was really high on what Brown was going to do for this team. And those have been gut punches. They've had to adjust, and it hasn't been seamless for them. Defensively, they've been about as good as you would have predicted. So, if not a little better, actually, their run defense, you need to mention how good they've been against the run. They're 4th against the run this year, which in the playoffs last year, they were really good. But regular season last year, they were 27th in run defense. So that's Leo Chanel. That's members of the D-line. Bolton is healthy. They've really cleaned up their act against the run, and that has been necessary given that their offense isn't super dynamic. So, yes, the Chiefs can still win the Super Bowl. They're 9-1. But hey, the Bills beat them. The Bills are the better team. They deserve to be ahead of them in the rankings. And I would love to see a rematch. Just watching that game, watching these teams go back and forth, it's this is big time. This is playoff football right here. So, really fun game. I think 5 is the right spot for the Chiefs. And then we got the Eagles at 4. They started the year ranked 3rd. And people thought it was too high on the Eagles. The Eagles are kind of the counterpoint to the whole Jets-Browns thing, where the culture just outweighed the roster talent. In Philadelphia, last year the culture was a problem down the stretch for them, but I still obviously believed in the roster talent. This is a super team, especially with the way that the defense has been rebuilt here. With Vic Fangio was just a perfect defensive coordinator hire for them. The linebacker acquisition that, I liked Zach Bond. I called him a sleeper on this team. I think I said in the deep dive that I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up the best linebacker on this team. Devin White was a bad signing. That's been a good take. Just kind of, he stood out to me on film when I was watching the Saints. And clearly Howie Roseman and company saw the same thing, because he's been an absolute game changer at the second level of that defense. But the acquisitions of these rookie corners, man, we knew it at the time that the league made a mistake letting the Eagles get Cooper DeJean and Quinyon Mitchell, but it is a little different seeing it in full force, where Quinyon Mitchell, if he had the interceptions to back it up, probably defensive rookie of the year. I mean, Jared Verse is also just absurd, but Quinyon Mitchell's been a shutdown corner. He put Terry McLaurin in a box last week. And Cooper DeJean's been like one of the best slot corners, if not the best slot corner in the league now that Brian Branch is like playing more safety. So everything's coming together defensively. And offensively, like, they just can do whatever they want with you, mostly in the run game. I mean, Saquon, that addition has been so fun. Love that. Hurts hasn't had to do too much here, and he's played better in the last 6-7 weeks, but he's not making mistakes. He's throwing, if the run game's not working and they end up in a tough spot, he's done a good job to just put well-placed balls down the field for Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown to go catch it. That's all they need from him. They need him to contribute in the run game, be better on the ground, which he's done that, and just throw an accurate football. Don't throw the ball to the other team. The rest of the team will do the heavy lifting, and that's exactly what's happening for Philadelphia. So they're in a good spot. They're where they're supposed to be. I ranked them 3 coming into the year. They're 8-2. And again, the only thing that matters is winning the Super Bowl. Baltimore Ravens at number 3. Obviously coming off, and I had them 6th coming into the year, by the way, which Ravens fans were so offended. I hated the Ravens so much, I ranked them 6th. How dare I suggest that they have some questions on the offensive line, and with losing 5 defensive coaching members, that the defense might not be as good. They've been better than 6, obviously, because Lamar has reached a new level. And because of that, I'm not too worried about the loss to Pittsburgh. They do fall to 7-4. So, obviously a worse record than the Chiefs and the Eagles. But because of the level Lamar is playing at, because of all the things we've talked about with the 12 personnel and Derrick Henry there, and how frustrating Lamar is to defend on drop-back passing downs with the level he's playing at right now. I think before Pittsburgh, he was running away with the MVP. Now he's still leading the MVP, but needs to finish strong to secure it, because it is very much a recency bias-based award. That's why Lamar won it last year. It would be kind of funny to see if it went the other way, where Lamar was actually the MVP this year and didn't get it because he played his worst games at the end of the year. But I don't know. MVP is always so weird how it gets voted on. But anyway, that's been so big for Baltimore, is just how complete Lamar has been. He's been more accurate. He's been faster, frankly. He's lost some weight in a good way. He's more comfortable with this offense. He's making great decisions. Like, that's why I'm not really worried about the loss to Pittsburgh. Justin Tucker missed 2 field goals, and they have the fumble early on, an uncharacteristic fumble from Derrick Henry. Honestly, the only worry from Baltimore is Justin Tucker has not been money. And I do think this team needs to have a mental adjustment and it's going to be hard for them to be a normal football team where you can't just count on Justin Tucker making 55-yard field goals all the time as that being like automatic. You got to set yourself up to go for it on 4th down more often and not count on that. So we'll see how they kind of handle that situation, that they don't have an elite kicker anymore, because Tucker, frankly, hasn't been that now for about 2 years. So that's really the only concern. Frankly, the defense played pretty well. They get Marlon Humphrey back in the lineup. I think that's massive. It's absolutely massive. People have been panicking about this secondary. Well, your number 1 corner's hurt. And then you're relying on Brandon Stevens. He's a CB3. You're relying on him to be a CB1. And Nate Wiggins is still figuring things out. So, I think they're going to be just fine defensively. So I'm not panicking. They actually keep their number 3 spot. Pittsburgh's just a really good team. They lost to them by a field goal in Pittsburgh. It's not the end of the world. And then at number 2, this is the team I was very, very wrong about, the Buffalo Bills. And I've talked about this. I've done my apologizing on the Bills quite a lot this year, because it was evident very quickly that I was wrong about the Bills. I just didn't see the vision. And that's my fault. I should be aware of league trends and what the team's vision is. But this team did exactly what the Chiefs have had success with, where, they get rid of Tyreek Hill and frankly, Mecole Hardman and they go from this explosive, push the ball downfield, dynamic offense to actually the league is sick of us destroying them with these big chunk plays. They're going to play us with quarters coverage and top-down coverage, and they're going to give us a lot of stuff underneath. So the Bills said, we don't need Stephon Diggs. We don't need Gabe Davis, vertical wide receiver. Give us 5 slot guys. Josh Allen is going to learn an offense that gets rid of the ball quickly, nickels and dimes you, and then we're going to have a great run game because we're getting light boxes. We have a quarterback that changes the numbers in the run game, and good luck when Josh Allen is reading out these concepts at the level he's doing it, and then you can mix in your shot plays and get your explosives in there. But, I looked at this and I guess actually doubted that Josh Allen, or at least didn't consider that Josh Allen was going to become this type of player, given where he came from in his career. And that's just super impressive, but it's a credit to Joe Brady. It's a credit to Sean McDermott for kind of having the foresight to kind of oversee all this as the head coach of this team. And the offensive line as well has been better than I expected. So James Cook has been better than I expected. They're a dominant football team, man. I have them at number 2, the best team in the AFC. And then you look at the other side of things, I thought this defense would struggle more. I think McDermott is doing a great job with the defense, obviously. But Greg Rousseau is having a bit of a breakout year as like more of a number 1 type of guy. You've got Christian Benford's actually emerging as like a legit number 1 corner. These linebackers continue to exceed expectations. So it's just all coming together for Buffalo, man. And, I hesitantly ranked them 14th. I had a lot of holdups with the upside of this team. I think I even predicted they would miss the playoffs and fire Sean McDermott. I mean, I was wrong. I was so wrong. I didn't see the vision, but I'm on board, Bills fans. I have Super Bowl futures on you guys to win it all. I've suggested Josh Allen MVP a couple times this year, and I think it's gonna come down to him and Lamar and who finishes stronger. But yeah, they obviously have just reshaped how I consider this football team, and I love it. And then number 1, Detroit. They were my number 2 team coming into the year. I mean, I had them over Kansas City, under Kansas City, mostly out of respect for Kansas City. This was my Super Bowl pick. They are the best team in football. I think they've outscored opponents by like 100 points the last 2 weeks. Like, they are just decimating teams. They got Zadarius Smith into the lineup this week against Jacksonville. Good to see him making a presence for a pass rush. That's, an area they need to, make up for losing Hutch a little bit. Not a lot of it. I mean, the fact that this offense is really historic as it is, you don't need a great defense, and they play so physical and tough, and they attack the football so well that they're going to make some plays. They're going to get some stops just out of scheme and tenacity and effort alone. It's just, what is there really to say about Detroit? It's just like sit back, grab your popcorn, and enjoy, because you just don't see teams like this very often. And I just hope they can get it done. I hope things go their way in the playoffs. I genuinely, as a Packers fan, I genuinely want to see that for Detroit. And even if I was lower on their draft last year, I have been high on this Lions team since the Dan Campbell hire. I had my doubts. I was wrong about their draft. Their draft last year was awesome. They haven't even really unlocked Laporta this year. That's been weird, which is a scary thought. But, this has to end in a Super Bowl, because I think Ben Johnson leaving is a big part of that. And it's just the offensive line especially, it's just really hard to maintain an O-line this good that stays healthy. Your 2 guards are old. Your left tackle's getting up there in age. Your center's had an injury history. So it's like, get it done. Stay healthy, get it done. They've already kind of shown that they can overcome the Hutch injury, I hope. But yeah, they're just a special football team, and not a ton of updates required on the Detroit Lions. Okay, you guys. If you listen to this whole 3-hour show, I love you. Thank you so much. The loyal listeners and fans of this channel make it go. So thank you so much. If you haven't hit that like button yet, please do. Really appreciate it. But yeah, I am going to stop talking so that I still have my voice this weekend after this Megalodon episode. Hope you guys enjoy. Drop your comments down below what you think of everything I said today. And we'll see you later. Peace out.